A 16-year-old girl, Fawn Cox, lived with her parents and younger sisters in a small two-story house situated in a rough residential neighborhood. Despite their limited means, Fawn helped take care of her siblings, attended church regularly, and enjoyed swimming. At 16, she took on a part-time job at a local amusement park during her summer vacations in 1989. Welcome to Z Crime Stories. Before we start, don't forget like video and subscribe for more. On July 26th, after finishing her shift at around 10 p.m., Fawn's mother and younger sister picked her up by car since public transportation would have been time-consuming. Upon returning home, Fawn went straight to bed as she had to work the following morning, sleeping alone on the second floor. Her sister Amber was babysitting for a neighbor, while Felicia chose to sleep on the cooler first floor where the only functioning air conditioner was located. The next morning, at around 9 o'clock, the family was awakened by the alarm clock in Fawn's room, which she failed to turn off. Concerned, her mother and younger sister went to her room, where they were met with a horrifying scene. Fawn lay lifeless on her bed, her neck visibly bruised, devoid of pulse. Despite calling for an ambulance, Fawn had already passed away several hours earlier. Medical experts determined that she had been strangled and also subjected to abuse prior to her death. The police faced a challenging investigation. Despite the murder occurring in a small house with poor soundproofing, Fawn's parents and sister heard nothing due to the loud air conditioner on the first floor. The only unusual occurrence was noticed by Fawn's sister, their anxious, barking poodle. However, they attributed the dog's behavior to pregnancy, unaware of its significance. Upon examining the crime scene, the police made several important discoveries. They theorized that the attacker or group entered the house through a second-story window overlooking the backyard. A nearby parked trailer facilitated access to the window, which had been left open due to the lack of air conditioning on the second floor. In Fawn's room, investigators found crucial clues: short hairs, small blood stains, and traces of semen on her bedsheet, all sent for laboratory analysis. Several items were also missing from the house, while others were found discarded on the ground outside. Further inspection revealed that items had been taken from a closet in an adjoining room on the second floor. It appeared that the perpetrator had been hiding in the closet, waiting for the household to sleep. However, since Fawn's sister didn't sleep in that room that night, the missing items went unnoticed. Another peculiar clue emerged: an old army cap found in Fawn's room, which her relatives claimed to have never seen her wear. Detectives believe that the killer may have left the cap behind accidentally. Despite the substantial evidence, the police struggled to identify suspects quickly. In 1989, DNA forensics were underdeveloped, and genetic databases were not commonly available. Detective Benjamin Caldwell, in charge of the case, proposed a theory that multiple assailants, familiar with the house, were involved. They not only knew how to access the second floor through the backyard but were also acquainted with the room layout. The next step for the police was to seek witnesses. They interviewed neighbors, friends, and relatives of Fawn but obtained inconclusive information. Complicating matters was the impoverished neighborhood, home to various criminal gangs, making it challenging to bring potential perpetrators to justice. Before we continue, don't forget like video and subscribe. 1 month after Fawn's murder, the case finally gained momentum. The police obtained a witness who provided crucial information that had not been made public, lending credibility to their account. This witness led the police to 3 teenage suspects, one of whom was in the same class as Fawn. The boys were arrested and questioned, but they vehemently denied any involvement in the murder. During a search of one of the suspects' homes, stolen items from Fawn's room were discovered. This evidence was sufficient to charge all 3 teenagers with murder. However, the detectives faced disappointment yet again. Firstly, the witness suddenly recanted their statement and ceased cooperating with the investigation. Secondly, DNA analysis conducted on blood, hair, and semen found at the crime scene did not definitively match the samples collected from the suspects. In those years, the technology for precise matching was not available, yielding inconclusive results. Nevertheless, one of the detainees provided valuable information during an interrogation. He confessed to breaking into Fawn's house that night with the company of other boys and stealing items. He described how he accessed the second floor through the canopy and revealed previously unknown details. According to his account, when he threw a tape recorder out of the window, the handle detached and fell. He hid it under a nearby bush, and the police indeed found the item in that exact location. However, the young man quickly recanted his confession and stopped cooperating with the investigation, rendering it inadmissible in court. Consequently, the police had to release the suspects, and the investigation came to a halt once again. It is likely that the witnesses were intimidated, and without their testimony, the case had minimal prospects. One of the suspects did serve 8 months in jail for stealing items from Fawn's house. The case remained dormant until the early 2000s when the police reopened the investigation. The first step was uploading DNA samples from the crime scene to the CODIS database, which had been established several years earlier and contained DNA profiles of individuals involved in serious crimes. Unfortunately, no matches were found for the killer. The creation of this database was a result of significant scientific advancements in DNA analysis and allowed the police to reanalyze DNA samples from the original suspects using more advanced techniques. This time, experts conclusively determined that the hair, semen, and blood did not belong to any of the 3 individuals. This discrepancy was perplexing considering the suspects were found in possession of Fawn's belongings. Detectives speculated that the 3 boys had indeed burglarized her house that night but had an accomplice who perpetrated the abuse and murder. This raised further questions. Could it be that 4 criminals entered the house undetected, killed Fawn, and left without a trace? The police had no answers to this question, and the case once again reached a standstill. As the years passed, the hope of solving Fawn's murder dwindled for her family. They remained convinced that the 3 initial suspects had been present in their house that night and might hold information about the killer but would never disclose it. The only possibility of uncovering the truth lay in a DNA sample stored in the police lab. Before we continue, don't forget to like video and subscribe. The authorities, their lack of resources, and the sheer number of unsolved cases posed significant challenges. In 2018, an intriguing development occurred. Fawn's younger sister, Amber, disclosed previously unknown details about the crime on a well-known American forum dedicated to unsolved crimes. The forum had gained a reputation for reliability over its 2 decades of existence, and its participants had assisted the police in solving several high-profile cases. Amber's identity was verified, adding credibility to her post. She revealed that she worked as a nanny during the week and only stayed at home on weekends, sleeping in the same room on the 2nd floor through which the burglars had entered. If criminals had indeed broken in, they would have been immediately noticed. Additionally, they would have needed to surveil the house and wait for Fawn's mother and younger sister to arrive to pick her up from work. Despite Amber's revelation, the case remained unsolved. However, it was now 2018, and advancements in DNA research had come a long way. New analysis tools were leading to the resolution of numerous long-forgotten cases. Fawn's relatives, aware of these advancements, questioned why the police were not reopening the murder investigation. They persisted in their conversations with the detectives, only to receive the same response each time: that extended DNA testing required funding, and the police had numerous cases to prioritize. Thus, the relatives had to wait for their turn and for funding to become available. Taking matters into their own hands, the family launched a fundraiser in 2019. They aimed to cover the full cost of DNA samples and offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The case received extensive media coverage, and through interviews and appeals, many caring individuals responded to the family's requests for assistance. The necessary funds were quickly raised. However, their hopes were dashed once again when the police department refused to initiate the investigation using the funds provided by the victims' relatives. The lead detective explained the challenges that would arise from such a situation. If the relatives of one victim could pay for tests and expedite the results, hundreds of other families who had been searching for years for the murderers of their loved ones would also expect the same right. Implementing such a system in practice would be impossible, as only a few laboratories worldwide conducted innovative DNA tests. With a simultaneous influx of requests, their resources would be insufficient. Paraben Nanolabs, a leading company in the field, had made significant advancements in DNA analysis, including identifying a person's relatives from minimal genetic samples and creating an approximate portrait of the DNA's owner. The family believed that this lab should take over the study of the samples from Fawn's bedroom on the night of her murder. Fawn's relatives suspected that the police were not actively pursuing the case due to their impoverished background and the neighborhood they lived in. Murder investigations were not prioritized for families like theirs. In an interview, Fawn's sister expressed her belief that if the murder had involved a wealthy or influential family, the investigations would have been conducted promptly. Unfortunately, the process could not be expedited, and it wasn't until late 2020 that a significant breakthrough occurred. However, the family was unprepared for the shocking truth that followed. With funding from the FBI, the police sent the samples from Fawn's room to a lab for detailed DNA analysis and a search for potential relatives of the DNA's owner. The semen sample found at the murder scene was primarily examined. In November 2020, they finally identified the individual to whom the DNA belonged, Fawn's cousin, Donald Cox. The revelation shook the entire family. At the time of Fawn's death, Donald was 21 years old, and his possible involvement had never been considered. Donald had a troubled history and had been frequently incarcerated for misdemeanors such as theft and drug possession. However, during those years, DNA samples were not collected from such criminals, which delayed the resolution of the case. Donald died of an overdose in 2006, and his death was investigated due to suspicious circumstances. A DNA sample was preserved during that investigation but was not entered into the FBI database since he was a victim, not a perpetrator. Once the experts informed the police about this discovery, they matched the sample with the semen found at the murder scene, resulting in a 100% match. Despite the significance of this revelation, the police closed the case and did not file new charges against the 3 original suspects. Fawn's sister believed that there was no point in trying to obtain a confession from them. While the suspects had been present in the house that night, they may not have witnessed the actual murder. It was possible that Donald had been alone in the house and subsequently attacked Fawn. Felicia, another sister of Fawn, added that the 3 suspects had already faced consequences for their actions. Throughout the unsolved case, the entire neighborhood was convinced of their guilt, leading to negative treatment and consequences for them. Furthermore, after the case was closed, it was revealed that the police initially learned about the suspects from the family of one of them. The family members noticed a Nintendo console among his belongings and remembered that it had been stolen from Fawn's house. This information became public knowledge through news reports, and everyone in the neighborhood was aware of the details. In any case, proving the guilt of the 3 original suspects was impossible. The relatives of the victim finally knew the name of the killer, but he lived for 17 years without facing any punishment for his crime. During that time, he continued to have contact with his family, but his addiction to illegal substances ultimately led to his demise, rendering him no longer a threat to anyone. Like the video if they found it appealing and subscribe and channel. A 15-year-old girl disappeared from her bedroom under mysterious circumstances. Police, the FBI, and hundreds of volunteers searched for her, diving into the case. Detectives uncovered many eerie facts and eventually solved this disturbing case. In this video, we tell you what happened to Riley Grossman and why the public was outraged when they learned the bitter truth. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. Riley Grossman was born on December 22, 2003, in the small American town of Martinsburg, West Virginia. Her parents divorced when she was young, and the girl moved with her mother and younger sister to Berkeley Springs, a town 40 kilometers from Martinsburg. After a while, her mother began dating another man, and they had 2 more children. However, Riley maintained a close relationship with her father and regularly went to visit him. The girl attended Berkeley Springs High School and took dance and singing lessons. She also had a boyfriend named Hayden Lacey. According to her parents, there was a great relationship between them. Riley was happy, and she and her boyfriend even had a joint Instagram account where they posted pictures together. Her mom, Chantel Oakley, worked 2 jobs. On May 7, 2019, she took off early from her morning shift because she wasn't feeling well. When she arrived home, she texted Riley that she was going to sleep in before her evening shift and asked her to wake her up when the girl returned from school. Riley came home at about 3:30 p.m., woke up her mother, and went to her room. Chantel's roommate's mother was also in the house with her that day, effectively replacing her grandmother and looking after the younger children. Chantel returned from work at about 10 p.m. As she walked past her daughter's room, she saw that her door was closed but the light was on behind it. Her mother thought Riley was getting ready for bed and went to bed herself. Almost immediately, she was still not feeling well and wanted to get a good night's sleep before her morning shift the next day. At about 7:15 a.m., Chantel peeked into her daughter's room before she left for work, but Riley wasn't there. She didn't see anything suspicious about that, though. School started at 7:45, and the girl could have gone there already. Riley's school was only a short walk away, so she got there on her own. About halfway through the day, her mother got a call from the school saying that Riley had missed some classes. This alarmed Chantel slightly, but she still didn't see it as a major concern. Her daughter could have just skipped a few classes and gone out with friends. At about 3:30 p.m., Riley's grandmother began to worry. The girl should have been home by now but still wasn't. Then she contacted Chantel, at which point her mother already suspected something was wrong. Riley was always calling or texting her to take time off to go out with friends after school, But that day she didn't get a single message from her daughter. Her mother had sent her several messages, and they had all failed to reach their destination. Then she tried calling her, but each time it went to voicemail. This indicated that Riley's phone was either dead or had been turned off for some reason. Chantel also called Riley's own father, hoping that the girl might have gone to him. However, he too did not contact his daughter that day. The mother asked her grandmother to go to the school and look for Riley there. The grandmother went there, but she was unable to locate the girl. None of the teachers knew where she could be either. Around 5 p.m., Chantel decided to take a day off from work and drove to the school, but she couldn't find her daughter either. She spotted her boyfriend in the parking lot and asked if he had seen Riley, but Hayden stated that he had spent the day on an out-of-town trip and had not even contacted her. Together, they went around the school grounds, looking in and around the building itself, but the girl was nowhere to be found. After a while, her mother decided to go home, hoping that Riley might have returned there. Alas, she was not there either. After waiting some more time, she decided to go to the police. By then, the girl's father had arrived in Berkeley Springs and went in search of his daughter. He drove around the small town asking people he met if they had seen Riley. With a population of just over 600, most of the residents knew each other. One of the local teenagers said he saw her walking down the street, but unfortunately, this information did nothing to help him find Riley, and investigators thought the boy was just mistaken. The police quickly began a search, interviewing everyone the girl knew. None of her friends had seen Riley that day, nor had she shown up at school. At the same time, several teachers noted that she was present in their classes. This misled the detectives at first, but it soon became clear these teachers had simply failed to notice the girl's absence and flagged her down. From conversations with Riley's acquaintances, the police began to reconstruct the chronology of events. They found out that on the evening of May 7th, the girl was on the phone with her boyfriend until 10:30 p.m., and she answered her friends' messages on social media until midnight. What follows is something very strange. At 5:40 a.m., Riley called her boyfriend by video link, but he was asleep at the time and didn't answer. The detectives immediately suspected something was wrong. Why was Riley trying to contact him at such an early hour? The girl's mother assured her that Riley would never run away from home. She simply had no reason to, given that she was the eldest child in the family. Her mother treated her very gently, almost never forbade her to go out with friends or a boyfriend, allowed her to go to her father's house in another town at any time, and generally did not control her every move. The only thing was that Riley always informed her of her plans and asked permission. Considering that, the girl was only 15 years old at the time of her disappearance. She had no driver's license, so leaving town on her own in a car was not possible. This indicated that the theory of an escape seemed unlikely. Instead, the detectives considered kidnapping as the most likely theory. The same evening, Riley's mother contacted law enforcement, and they began a search for the girl. Police officers searched the school, surrounding area, and combed the town. Community volunteers who cared about Riley joined the search. Small-town residents, thinking something like this could never happen to them, were shocked. Soon, the police decided to search Riley's bedroom. There, they found the first grisly piece of evidence, a pillow and sheets with small blood stains. They sent the items to a lab for DNA testing, which confirmed that the blood belonged to Riley. It became evident that something terrible had happened to the girl. After the discovery of the blood, it became clear that Riley had not gone somewhere on her own initiative. It was up to the police to figure out what had occurred. The fact that her mother had not noticed traces of blood earlier was explained by the bed being made, and she didn't think to lift the blanket. The blood trail indicated that the girl had likely been attacked in her house. The police needed to identify the perpetrator. The search escalated, with more volunteers and equipment being provided. Press conferences were held to spread the story to the public in the hopes that someone might have noticed or heard something useful. The local police were joined by the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and state police. Together, they continued the search, but with no results. Eventually, on May 15th, law enforcement decided to bring in additional forces for a large-scale search. The next morning, they announced that Riley Crossman's body had been found about a 40-minute drive from Berkeley Springs, near a country road on a small mountain. It was clear that it was a murder, not an accident, as the body had been hidden away. Medical examiners couldn't determine the cause of death due to extensive decomposition, despite it only being just over a week since Riley's disappearance. Several other strange things were noticed, such as the girl wearing only one shoe and different clothing than what she was supposed to be wearing. Traces of whitewash or plaster were also found on her clothes. The case was reclassified as a homicide, and the police had to find the perpetrator. During re-interviews of Riley's relatives and acquaintances, discrepancies arose in the testimony of Andy McCauley, Chantel's roommate. Andy initially claimed he didn't leave work on Riley's birthday, but a neighbor saw a different car parked in front of their house. Andy's driver's license had been revoked, making it suspicious. The neighbor shared this observation with the police, leading to further questioning. Detectives determined that the vehicle belonged to one of Andy's co-workers, who often picked him up for work. Andy changed his statement multiple times, initially denying involvement, then admitting to using the pickup truck to buy illegal substances. More strange discoveries awaited the detectives. Riley's mother was asked about any oddities in her roommate's behavior. She recalled something unusual, which she shared with the police. On May 8th, the day her daughter disappeared, Andy had indeed been acting suspiciously when he returned home that night. Chantel told him about Riley's disappearance. The man immediately said he would go looking for her, got on his bicycle, and rode off. However, when the woman returned home from her search, she found Andy asleep on the couch as if nothing had happened. This behavior was very strange. All of Riley's relatives had been combing the streets until late at night, helped by concerned townspeople, while Andy simply went to sleep as if nothing had happened. In addition, one day after the girl went missing, Chantel called Andy and recorded the conversation. Unfortunately, its full content was not disclosed. All we know is that Chantel was already suspicious of Andy at this point and linked it all to his addiction to illegal substances. The police then spoke to Andy's co-worker and found out that, in fact, the man had been absent from work from about 9 a.m. until about 2 p.m. The co-worker also stated that he believed Andy had banned substances with him to begin with, so there was no reason for him to go somewhere to get them. The detectives then searched for the green Dodge and found a large stain of dried plaster in the trunk. Forensics showed that it was the same substance found on Riley's clothing. Investigators also led service dogs to the pickup, which detected a deadly smell in the trunk. 2 of the exact same bolts were found near Riley's body. The police soon found another inconsistency in Andy's statement. They examined camera footage from nearby communities and found that on May 8th, the man was only a few miles from where Riley's body would later be found. He was caught on gas station store cameras and on several traffic cameras. It was all very strange. Andy didn't have a driver's license, was usually picked up by other people, and got around on his bike. But this day, for some reason, he took someone else's car and drove around for half a day on unfamiliar routes. Another co-worker told the police that on May 8th, Andy asked him for 3 construction bags. Detectives were also approached by Andy's former co-worker who told an even creepier story. He said that he and Andy had never gotten along, but between about 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. on May 8th, Andy called him dozens of times and also sent a whole bunch of messages. He was in a panic and said he needed to hide with someone right away. Andy explained that he was in possession of illegal substances and was afraid of being caught. This former colleague did not let him in that night but later reported the story to the police. In his defense, the man stated that he had taken illegal substances at night, after which he noticed a police car parked not far from his house and panicked. However, the police department checked this information and found that none of their cars were in that area. This meant that Andy's story was a common lie. All of the above was enough for the police to arrest Andy the day after the body was found and charge him with murder. The man denied guilt, so the case went to trial. The case then stalled for more than 2 years as the trial did not begin until September 27, 2021. This was due to the coronavirus and the limitations associated with it, as well as the peculiarities of the U.S. court system where such delays are the norm. Nevertheless, even more gruesome details of the case emerged during the course of the trial. For starters, Chantel, in her speech, provided one disturbing detail about the evening of May 7th. That afternoon, she returned from work at 10 p.m. and Andy was asleep on the couch. When she entered the room, the man immediately woke up. When she saw his eyes, Chantel immediately thought he had taken illegal substances. Andy had used powerful drugs before and even had a criminal record for possession, of which the woman was well aware. Further, the prosecution revealed information about disturbing messages sent from Riley's phone shortly before her disappearance. At 11 p.m. on May 7th, the girl texted her boyfriend that Andy had just gone into her room. 12 minutes later, she sent another text where she wrote that she was scared. She never contacted him again. Unfortunately, Hayden had already gone to bed at that time and did not see these messages. By morning, they had already been deleted. At trial, he also said that Andy had repeatedly entered Riley's room that night. The girl was video chatting with her boyfriend, and Hayden could hear him enter the room. Andy asked her to do the dishes and talked about some other mundane things, but Riley was unequivocally afraid of him. She asked the guy not to pass out while Andy was in her room. It also came out at trial that Andy had called Riley several times around 3 a.m., but she wouldn't pick up the phone, and on the 3rd time, she blocked his number altogether. The whole thing was very creepy and incomprehensible. According to the prosecution's version, Andy made these calls to see if Riley was communicating with her boyfriend at the time. Later, the records of these calls were deleted from both phones, but the cell phone provider still had them. Despite all this, the prosecution had no evidence to indicate what had happened that night. They speculated that Andy killed Riley late that night, waited until morning, and drove to work. He then borrowed a co-worker's car, drove to the house, picked up the body, and took it to a secluded spot. He then cleared the message and call history from her phone and got rid of it. It also emerged at trial that Chantel and Andy's own mother not only knew about his addiction to illegal substances, but they also knew that under their influence, the man was becoming aggressive and dangerous. The final court hearing was held on October 5, 2021. Despite the fact that all available evidence was circumstantial and did not directly connect Andy to the murder, the jury reached a guilty verdict. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Further consideration was given to the possibility of parole. Andy's attorneys asked to give their client the option after 15 years, but the judge ultimately ruled for life without the possibility of parole. As the judge pronounced the sentence, Andy showed no emotion. He also seemed detached and uninterested at previous hearings. Apparently, he had resigned himself to the inevitable. But what about motive? Because of the degree of decomposition, the experts could not establish whether Riley had been abused. However, this is the most obvious option, even though the court could not prove it. This story was widely covered in the American media, and people's opinions were divided. Some put part of the blame on the girl's mother, who brought a convicted drug addict into her home and built a family with him. At the trial, she assured them that it had never even occurred to her that Andy might harm her children. Others defended the mother, believing that she could not have foreseen such an outcome. She worked 2 jobs most of the time to feed her family, and perhaps she didn't even have time to think about how her decisions might affect her children. What remains unclear is the moment of that 5:30 a.m. video call made from Riley Hayden's phone. Was the girl still alive at that moment, or did Andy make the call to throw off the investigation later? Do you think Chantel should be blamed for the situation? Tell us what you think, and don't forget to like this video. Take care and thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video. Take care and thanks for watching. This mysterious story took place in early 2020. A 16-year-old girl disappeared under strange circumstances, but unraveling the case only made it more confusing. Even though the police have completed their investigation, the case is still one of the most mysterious in recent years. In this video, we will tell you about the gruesome story of Selena Shelley Faye and try to answer the big question: did the police really resolve the case, or did they cover up what really happened to her? Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. A Native American, Selena Shelley Faye, was born on June 18, 2003 on the Indian reservation of Bighorn County, Montana, in a town called Harding. People she knew described her as a kind, cheerful, and very active girl. She loved to play basketball, had many friends, but her main hobby was horseback riding. Selena seriously considered opening her own farm when she graduated from high school, as well as participating in races at the professional level. Even with all the tragedy her family had endured, she kept a positive attitude. Originally a family of 5 children, Selena's 11-year-old twin sister committed suicide in 2014, leaving no hint as to what prompted her to complete such a tragic move. In 2017, Selena's brother was killed by a police officer, and that same year, Selena's older sister was killed under the wheels of a car. She was walking along the road when an unknown driver hit her and fled the scene. That left only 2 of the 5 children. It's hard to believe how much pain and suffering one family can endure. Alas, the tragedies in their lives did not end there. Selena spent New Year's Eve 2020 with friends. They went to a party at a country house where they stayed until the next day. On January 1st, Selena and 5 of her friends, which included 4 young men and 1 girl, drove back to Harding by car. Then, the story gets weird, to say the least. Nevertheless, this is the official data from the case file, and we will read it first. The car malfunctioned on its way into town. The driver parked it at a nearby stop and tried to fix the car. He managed to fix the problem temporarily, but he stated that the car could break down again at any time. For this reason, he asked Selena and her friend Orlando to wait at the stop until his mother drove up there to pick them up. Since she was just under 15 minutes away from the stop by car, the story sounds highly questionable. Why did the girls' friends decide to drive on, leaving them at a bus stop in the middle of nowhere? But that is exactly the way things were, according to the driver. There was also a version that after fixing the car, the driver had to leave immediately, otherwise the car risked stalling again. And Selena and her friend at the time had gone too far, and the guys decided to leave without them, sending the mother of one of them after them. But this version is not reflected in the police documents but only cited by the local media. What follows is actually confirmed information. The driver's mother had indeed come to the bus stop to pick up the girls, but they were no longer there. Thinking they might have been walking around somewhere nearby, the woman began to look for them. At one point, she did come across Orlando, who was sitting in a ditch looking lost. Her shoes were missing, and all her feet were covered in scratches. Selena was nowhere near her. The shocked woman tried to ask Orlando what had happened, but she said she had absolutely no memory of how she got there and didn't even know where she was. Then, the woman contacted Selena's parents and told them she was missing, and they immediately contacted the police. The first thing the police did was talk to Orlando. She still couldn't remember the details of what had happened. She only told the detectives that she had seen Selena just walk off in the direction of the road into a field, and her friend never saw her again. Upon hearing this story, Selena's parents couldn't understand why their daughter would go off in some unknown direction for no apparent reason. The problem was that it was freezing outside, and the girl was clearly not dressed for the weather. She was wearing a light jacket, sweater, and jeans. I think you've already realized how strange this whole story is, but that was just the beginning. On the same day, police organized a large-scale search within a radius of about 6 kilometers of the place where the girl was last seen. Hundreds of people, including service dogs, mounted police, helicopters, ATVs, and even drones with heat sensors were involved. The FBI also became involved very quickly. The case may have taken on such proportions because of a sad statistic: Native Americans in Montana go missing far more often than other segments of the population. Most of the time, police are as reluctant as possible to investigate these cases and sometimes refuse to do so at all. Locals regularly come out in protests and try to reach out to the federal government, but Native Americans continue to go missing. In addition, Selena's relatives immediately turned to news outlets for help in making the story public and speeding up police work. News of Selena's disappearance quickly spread throughout the city, and hundreds of volunteers joined the search for her. Most were also Native Americans, including students from her school. Adults helped scour the area, and teenagers posted flyers and distributed information about their classmates' disappearance throughout the city. But the search yielded no results. Of course, police examined the car in which Selena and her friends drove home and also questioned all her friends who had been with her that day. And here are things that are just as strange: investigators have not released any information related to this. The friends may not have told them anything useful, but the public was waiting for at least some details. Then, the police decided to pursue another theory: what if Selena had been kidnapped from that bus stop? This theory ran counter to the story of a friend who claimed Selena had gone into the field, but the kidnapping theory received some support as well. A witness reported seeing a green car with Wyoming plates near the bus stop. As the days went by, the search yielded no results, so most people began to consider the kidnapping version as the main one. Reports poured into the police that people had seen the girl in various places, but all these leads proved useless. The police also tried to track the location of the girl's smartphone, but they were unsuccessful. It was turned off. The investigation continued in such ignorance until January 20th. On that day, 3 weeks after Selena's disappearance, the most mysterious event in the whole story happened. The girl's body was finally found. It was found just a mile from that very bus stop. The body was discovered by the Bighorn County Sheriff, who went by the Indian name Big Hair. Let's refresh your memory on key points: hundreds of volunteers on foot, dozens of horseback riders, service dogs, a helicopter, drones with heat sensors, and a search radius of about 6 kilometers. For all that, the body is found within a kilometer of the bus stop. At this point, everyone had one question: how could they not notice? Of particular note is the fact that the place where Selena was found is practically a bare field. The Bighorn County Sheriff's Office said the preliminary version is that death was due to natural causes. On February 28th, more than a month after the body was found, the results of the medical examination came back. The report, signed by 4 doctors, cited hypothermia as the cause of death. All of this raised even more questions and distrust on the part of the public. Not only were search parties unable to locate Selena in an open field for 20 days, but she also allegedly died of hypothermia a kilometer from the road. Let's take a look at what the temperature was that day. According to a local news site that publishes daily weather information, it was about 8 degrees outside in the afternoon. January 1st. Selena was wearing a light jacket and sweater, although it was not enough for a long and comfortable stay outside. Is it possible for a healthy 16-year-old girl to freeze to death? After all, there was a highway just a kilometer away from her where cars passed by regularly, and she could call for help. How should events have developed so that the girl deliberately waited to die in one place and managed to freeze to death at 8 degrees Celsius? Of course, all these questions fell on the police. Investigators said that drones and a helicopter were obstructed by poor visibility that day due to heavy fog, and that foot and other units simply did not notice Selena, even though they were passing within a few hundred meters of her. As for the dogs, they were service dogs but not search dogs. In addition, they were kept on a leash because many strangers were involved in the search, and the police were afraid to let the dogs go so that they would not attack those present. To Selena's family, as well as the entire Native American community, these excuses seemed utterly unconvincing, and they demanded a thorough investigation into her murder. To them, it looked as if the girl's body had been placed there after the first wave of the search ended. But there was one big problem here. The Bighorn County Sheriff who led the police in this case and personally discovered Selena's body had a very murky history behind him. In 1995, when he was still a simple officer, a Native American woman accused him of violence, but the man denied the charges and was not convicted. 2 years later, his service weapon was used in a murder and the would-be sheriff was put on trial again. There, he claimed his weapon had been stolen and had nothing to do with the case. All charges were dropped again, but here's the strange thing, he paid the victim's family a portion of the amount they demanded in the lawsuit. Later, he went to court again for assault and battery, but here too, he received no serious punishment. Not surprisingly, the community was slow to take this man at his word. Despite the FBI's involvement in the case, relatives and acquaintances of Selena began to suspect that the sheriff himself might have something to do with the murder of the girl and the further cover-up of this fact. But here, another question arises. Even if we imagine that the sheriff grabbed Selena that day and took her to an undisclosed location, what next? The 4 medical examiners signed a report that clearly stated there were no marks on the girl's body indicating a violent death. They could only confirm death from hypothermia. Given the FBI's involvement, could the sheriff have gotten the 4 doctors to cover something up? Or could he have kept Selena outside until she actually died of hypothermia? It sounds doubtful. There is another version of what happened. The teens were drinking on New Year's Eve, as the initial toxicology report indicates, but no one knows what they did the next day. They may have continued drinking or taken some kind of illegal substance. As for alcohol, it is unlikely to be relevant. A person would need to drink a lot to just go into a field, lie on the ground, and stay there long enough to die of hypothermia. Even taking into account the fact that Selena was only 16 years old, this theory is somehow not believable. But the version about banned substances could explain a lot. First, let's remember Selena's friend who was sitting in a ditch with no shoes and scratched feet. Then, let's remember the extremely strange story about the broken down car and the unclear reasons why the boys left the girls at a deserted bus stop. Perhaps the teens did take something, but it was too much for the bodies of the 2 girls. The boys could have gotten scared and just left them at the bus stop. But this theory is greatly undermined by the fact that the driver did call his mother, who came to pick up the girls just 15 minutes later. Would he have done so if the girls were in an inadequate condition? Most likely, teenagers would not have involved their parents in such a situation. But there are a few odd things about their company. First, Selena's friend posted several short videos on Snapchat from that trip. One of the moments shows someone standing in front of the open hood of the car, trying to fix something. At the same time, near the back passenger seat, 2 guys are arguing aggressively about something. What was going on there is still unknown. All the people who were with Selena that day are silent. What's more, 2 of them have moved to other states, and Orlando has deleted her Facebook page. It's all very strange. It's been over a year, and none of them have responded to the questions that are still troubling the local Native American community and other concerned people. Nor have the police made any comment about the other teenagers. There is a persistent impression that something is being carefully hidden in this story. As a result, we have a closed case where the official version seems too dubious because, according to it, Selena just went into the field, walked for a few hours, and then just lay on the ground. After all, the police were already on the scene a few hours later, and if she had continued to walk around, she would definitely have been spotted. Furthermore, she could not be found by hundreds of people with modern technology, and 20 days later, her body appeared a kilometer down the road. It looked as if she had been placed there after the active phase of the search was over, although the police assure us that there were no tire tracks or other evidence that the body might have been moved near this spot. One can't trust the police in this case, given the history of the sheriff. One seriously doubts that the police investigation can be considered objective. However, the FBI was involved in the case, and they certainly wouldn't cover up some provincial sheriff. As we can see, each version faces its own contradictions. Now, 1.5 years later, the girl's family is still trying to find answers. Out of 5 children, they have only 1 son left. They are asking to spread the story about their daughter so they can have a chance at a new, honest investigation. What do you think happened to Selena after all? Share your opinion in the comments and support the video with a if you liked it. Thanks for watching, and thank you for.
An 11-year-old girl vanished from school, leaving no trace, and remained missing for years, making it an eerie and bewildering case in California. With numerous unexpected turns and peculiar facts, this perplexing investigation held the attention of millions worldwide. After 45 years, the truth was finally unearthed, but the story didn't conclude there. In this video, we'll delve into Linda O'Keefe's journey and explore why this inquiry captivated countless individuals globally. Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Linda O'Keefe, born on May 24, 1962, in Newport Beach, California, USA, Linda O'Keefe grew up in a tight-knit family. Her father worked as a machinist, while her mother was a seamstress. Linda had two sisters, an older and a younger one. Fond of drawing, playing the piano, and cherishing nature and animals, Linda embraced life with enthusiasm. Whenever warm summer days arrived, she seized the opportunity to visit the beach, a mere 800 meters from her home. Additionally, she actively participated in the Girl Scouts and attended summer school. In July 1973, Linda, then 11 years old, attended school nearly every day. Typically, she rode her bicycle to school. However, on the morning of July 6, her piano teacher, residing a few houses away from the O'Keefe family, kindly offered to give her a ride home after classes ended around 1:30 p.m. In need of her bicycle that day, Linda used the school phone to call her mother and requested a pickup. Unfortunately, her mother was preoccupied with work and preferred not to be interrupted, advising Linda to walk instead. Despite the distance between school and home being just over 2 kilometers, Linda hesitated after talking to her mother. She even shed tears, prompting the school secretary to consider giving her a ride. Regrettably, the secretary needed to travel in the opposite direction, relinquishing the idea. Shortly after leaving the school premises, Linda lingered outside the building for a while before embarking on her journey homeward. The route typically required no more than half an hour, yet the girl experienced a noticeable delay. Initially, her mother dismissed it, assuming Linda had met friends and decided to take a stroll. However, as the hours passed, her concern grew exponentially. By 6 p.m., overcome by worry, Linda's mother began reaching out to acquaintances whose children lived nearby, inquiring if they had seen her daughter. Unfortunately, none of them had encountered Linda that day. When Linda's father returned from work, the family initiated a search. They scoured the neighborhood, including the path Linda would have taken from school. Initially, they presumed that the girl, resentful of her mother's refusal to pick her up, intentionally delayed her return home. However, as darkness encroached and Linda remained unfound, they decided to involve the police. Officers filed a missing person report and commenced their investigation. Simultaneously, Linda's father and older sister traversed the neighborhood in 2 cars, attempting to reassure residents, while her mother remained at home, contacting numerous individuals who might have caught a glimpse of Linda. The search persisted throughout the night, with law enforcement scouring the streets and parks utilizing search dogs and helicopters, yet the outcome remained inconclusive. The following morning, more officers joined the search, and local newspapers reported on the extensive efforts to locate the missing 11-year-old girl. Around 10:30 a.m., a bicyclist, accompanied by a friend and their son, ventured into a park approximately 9 kilometers away from Linda's residence. They visited the park as part of the botanical circle, observing local fauna. As the father and child approached the ditches to observe frogs, they stumbled upon something unexpected. Intrigued by a light object in the grass, the man approached and discovered a partially submerged human body. Having read about the ongoing search for a missing girl in the morning newspaper, he immediately suspected that the body belonged to Linda. Urgently, the man and his companions hurried out of the park, heading to the nearest payphone to report their discovery. En route, they encountered a police officer who had been involved in the search for Linda. Sharing their account, they informed the officer and proceeded toward the location together. The investigators swiftly confirmed that the deceased individual was indeed Linda O'Keefe. She was attired in the same clothing she had worn to school, with her backpack lying nearby. Remarkably, the dress she wore had been handmade by her mother. However, Linda was barefoot, and her shoes were nowhere to be found near the body. Detectives meticulously examined the crime scene, discovering tire tracks in close proximity to the body but no other significant clues. The medical examiners determined that Linda had died from strangulation, estimating the time of death to be between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. It became apparent to the investigators that Linda had likely been abducted shortly after leaving school, implying that the perpetrator had held her captive for approximately 12 hours. Furthermore, The victim had endured abuse, and traces of DNA were discovered on her body, which were preserved in the laboratory as DNA analysis was not yet available during that time. With limited substantial leads, the detectives focused on locating witnesses. They interviewed Linda's friends, school staff, and residents along the route she would have taken home. Their efforts soon yielded results. One of Linda's friends had spotted something unusual while the girl was walking home. A turquoise van approached Linda, slowed down, and continued driving alongside her. Unfortunately, the friend lost sight of Linda and the van shortly after. 2 additional witnesses came forward. A 19-year-old girl and her mother were driving in a car around 100 yards from Linda's school when they noticed the girl engaged in conversation with the driver of a turquoise van that had stopped beside her. This encounter occurred around 1:15 p.m. Given their proximity to the O'Keefe family and their familiarity with Linda, they found it surprising that she was conversing with an unknown adult male. Intrigued, they decided to observe the situation. The passenger door of the van remained open, and Linda stood in front of it, engaged in conversation with the driver. Eventually, she entered the vehicle. Subsequently, the van departed, and the witnesses did not pay significant attention, assuming Linda had been picked up by a relative or acquaintance, given their belief that she would not willingly enter a vehicle with a stranger. Following these accounts, investigators obtained a rough description of the driver, a white man between the ages of 24 and 30, with curly blonde hair and an elongated face. Unfortunately, the witnesses could not recall the license plate number or make of the car. Nonetheless, this testimony provided the most substantial lead in the case, prompting investigators to issue an all-points bulletin, APB, on the suspect and his vehicle. The APB circulated throughout California, but it proved futile in apprehending the perpetrator. Detectives maintained regular communication with the witnesses, hoping they would recollect additional details. Hypnosis sessions were even conducted, partially aiding their memory recall. Although the witnesses managed to provide some supplementary information about the suspect's vehicle, the details were too insignificant to lead to the killer's identification. Another witness emerged, a woman residing near the area where Linda's body was discovered. At approximately 10:30 p.m., the witness heard a woman screaming, with words like, "Stop hurting me," abruptly cut off. Given the proximity and timing, it was likely connected to the time of Linda's death. Detectives also received an intriguing tip. On the morning of Linda's body being found, an artist was painting in the park. Noticing the multitude of police cars, he grew curious and observed the situation. At one point, he noticed something peculiar, a young man lurking in the bushes, close to his location. Inquisitive, the artist approached the man and inquired about the commotion. The young man appeared deeply concerned and revealed that the police had discovered the girl's body. Despite being positioned far from where the body was found and unable to discern any specific details, the man's foreknowledge of the situation raised questions. The artist described him as a slim white male between 18 and 24 years old, approximately 180 centimeters tall, with blonde hair and sideburns. The description closely matched the accounts of the van's driver provided by the previous witnesses. Consequently, investigators deduced that this individual was the killer and had chosen to monitor the police activity that morning. Despite having a detailed description of the killer's appearance, locating him in the vast city proved challenging for the police. However, 2 days later, an unexpected turn of events occurred. Peter Wooten, an 18-year-old who lived near the O'Keefe family and was in the same class as Linda's older sister, came forward and confessed to the murder. The news spread rapidly, shocking the community. The police interrogated Peter for 7 hours and searched his parents' home, where he resided. He was formally charged with murder. However, 3 days later, another surprising twist unfolded. The investigators announced that Peter had been exonerated of all charges and released. His confession contained numerous inconsistencies, with the only coincidences aligning with information already publicized in the newspapers. Moreover, he deliberately provided false testimony that contradicted the actual evidence. Furthermore, The two witnesses who had seen Linda with the van driver unequivocally stated that Peter was not the individual they encountered. Their familiarity with Peter, as he lived nearby, made it clear that he was not the same person. Consequently, the police concluded that Peter had fabricated the confession as an attempt to draw attention to himself. While it was possible that he may have had mental health issues, he had no connection to the murder. Following this turn of events, the detectives were left without any solid leads. The search for the van and its driver continued throughout the town, with the entire community, including Linda's classmates, actively participating despite objections from the police. However, these efforts yielded no results. In the initial month of the investigation, 175 individuals were questioned, and every inch of the route from school to home was meticulously searched. The police appealed to the public for assistance. Weeks later, a rough sketch of the van's driver was released, yet it failed to generate any substantial leads. Detectives initially hesitated to release the sketch, fearing that the man might flee the town. However, the urgency to solve the case prompted them to employ additional resources each passing day. 2 months later, a new lead emerged when another girl was assaulted in the same neighborhood. An unidentified man had forcibly taken her into his van, transported her to an isolated location, and subsequently released her after committing the crime. Investigators speculated that Linda's killer might be responsible for this new incident, but inconsistencies arose. The assailant drove a white van, and the description of his appearance did not match the information provided by witnesses in Linda's case. Eventually, detectives identified a suspect, a 32-year-old trucker, and his guilt was proven. Witness testimonies confirmed that he bore no resemblance to the man Linda had been seen conversing with. Consequently, investigators concluded that this man had no involvement in her murder. Since then, no significant evidence has emerged in the case, although detectives have continued working on it throughout the years. In 2001, 28 years after the murder, DNA samples from Linda's body were sent to a laboratory to extract the killer's DNA profile. Although they successfully obtained the profile, the man was not found in the FBI database. This indicated that the killer had not been previously convicted in other criminal cases or that the offenses occurred before DNA collection became commonplace. Years later, advancements in DNA analysis technology allowed investigators in Linda's case to turn to a private lab called Parabon in 2018. Utilizing DNA phenotyping, which reveals various traits of a person's appearance based on their DNA sample, specialists created 2 portraits of what the perpetrator might have looked like at the ages of 20 and 60. Remarkably, these portraits closely resembled the descriptions provided by witnesses who had seen the suspect 45 years earlier. Typically, police would release these portraits in the media to garner public attention and seek information from individuals who may have known the man. However, the investigators took an unprecedented approach. On July 6, 2018, precisely 45 years after the murder, they took to Twitter and posted a series of messages in the name of the victim herself. The 68-tweet series detailed Linda's final day, portraying her perspective and recounting the events of July 6, 1973. Each message was meticulously selected by the detectives to construct an accurate representation of that fateful day. The Twitter narrative concluded by stating that the search for Linda's killer had remained unsuccessful, followed by the release of the perpetrator's portrait on behalf of the girl. Now, 45 years later, I can speak again, and there is something important I have to tell you. There is a new lead in my case, a face obtained thanks to the DNA of the killer, which he left behind. This technology didn't exist in 1973, but now it can change everything. This innovative approach instantly captured the attention of a vast global audience. While police had previously shared information on old unsolved cases via social media, a narrative presented from the victim's perspective was unprecedented. Although the portrait of the killer alone could not solve the case unless someone recognized him and reported to the police, the investigators aimed to generate as much attention as possible. In total, over 7 million people viewed the series of tweets. The police received numerous tips and potential identifications of the perpetrator, prompting the detectives to spend several months investigating each lead. Unfortunately, they were unable to find a suitable suspect among the information provided. Nonetheless, the investigators remained resolute, particularly with the immense public interest that Linda's case had garnered. Once again, they turned to Parabon, requesting assistance in identifying the killer's relatives through his DNA. A similar endeavor had been attempted by forensic scientists in the early 2000s, but the necessary tools were not yet available. However, almost 2 decades later, the situation had changed. Parabon's experts successfully located individuals related to the DNA's owner, providing investigators with crucial information that could lead to the identification of the perpetrator. After months of extensive research and utilizing private DNA databases, investigators in Linda's case were able to identify the killer's third cousin, bringing them one step closer to solving the case. However, their breakthrough took an unexpected turn when they discovered that the killer's own DNA was present in one of the private databases. James Allen Neal, a 72-year-old man living in another state, emerged as the prime suspect. In January 2019, detectives visited Neal's residence to gather a sample of his DNA, a necessary step for legal proceedings. They set up surveillance and collected items from his garbage, which were sent to the lab for analysis. Although initial attempts to obtain a DNA sample failed, they successfully retrieved one when Neal discarded a cigarette butt during a parking lot encounter. The DNA from the sample matched the DNA found on Linda's body, conclusively linking James Neal to the crime that had remained unsolved for almost half a century. A few days later, a press conference was held to announce the arrest of James Neal. Born in 1946 in Chicago, Neal's family later relocated to California. Throughout his childhood, he experienced regular abuse and humiliation from his parents, which led to aggressive behavior from an early age. As a teenager, he engaged in various petty offenses, including burglary. After dropping out of school, he pursued short-lived jobs but never maintained stability for more than a few months. James Neal had an extensive criminal history, having been arrested over 12 times for crimes ranging from theft to robbery. However, he often received minimal punishments and swiftly returned to his old ways. At the age of 25, he married for the first time, and the couple settled in the Los Angeles suburbs, a short distance from where Linda lived. It was 2 years into their marriage that he committed the heinous act of killing Linda. During this time, James's wife was pregnant, and he was already on probation for lesser crimes in another state. In the subsequent years, Neal was cited multiple times for theft and counterfeit activities, and he briefly served time in prison for violating probation terms. After his release, he encountered further legal trouble for traffic violations. He divorced his first wife, with whom he had 2 daughters. He later lived in different states before returning to Colorado, where he married another woman in 1997. They had a daughter together, joining her child from a previous marriage. Further investigation into Neal's background revealed potential involvement in numerous cases of child abuse, although he had never been held accountable for these actions. In 1995 and 2004, he allegedly kidnapped 2 girls, subjected them to abuse, and then released them. However, he was never proven guilty in these instances, leaving him free to continue his activities. Police suspected him of being involved in at least 5 additional similar cases where unidentified men in cars abducted girls from the streets. In 2010, a girl from the same church as Neal accused him of molesting her when he was 63 years old. The victim provided accounts of several similar incidents, and Neal eventually confessed. However, the case inexplicably ended up being suppressed, with the victim retracting her accusations, and James Neal went unpunished. He resumed his regular life, remaining off the police's radar for the next 9 years until his arrest for Linda's murder. During the trial, Neal consistently denied any involvement, claiming he had never abducted any girls. When shown a photo of Linda, He stated he had never seen her with the man and suggested she resembled one of his daughters. Despite his denials, the presence of his DNA on the victim's body left little room for doubt, making his guilt apparent to investigators. Additional evidence was gathered to strengthen the case, including attempts to ascertain if Neil owned a turquoise van. However, no confirmation of this fact was found, which was explained by his employment at the time as a worker in an apartment complex, providing access to a service van. During the search of Neil's residence, investigators discovered several hard drives containing illegal materials, along with similar photos and videos on his smartphone. Notably, his computer revealed an interest in the history of violent criminals apprehended through DNA analysis, suggesting his awareness of the potential link between DNA and crime solving. Another chilling revelation occurred during the examination of Neil before his placement in a cell. A tattoo bearing Linda's name was discovered on his wrist. However, it was later confirmed to be an eerie coincidence, as James had acquired the tattoo long before the murder. The trial, originally scheduled for February 2020, was postponed due to the pandemic. Throughout the proceedings, James Neil maintained his innocence, but the overwhelming evidence against him left little doubt about his role in Linda's murder. However, the case never reached trial, as in May, Neil was hospitalized and succumbed to lung cancer 2 days later. Unaware of his illness at the time of his arrest, it was too late for medical intervention. Finally, the case that had haunted investigators for half a century found closure. Detectives continue to believe that Neil may have had numerous additional victims, and they remain committed to investigating in that direction. Linda's parents, who had long since passed away, carried the burden of guilt throughout their lives, particularly Linda's mother, who blamed herself for not picking her daughter up from school. Linda's sisters expressed gratitude to the investigators for their unwavering commitment to solving the case, although they regretted that their parents did not live to witness the day justice was served. Share your opinion on this story in the comments and don't forget to like this clip if you liked it. Thanks for watching.
The story of Jan and Kiana Piasek is truly a love story. After what was certainly their most joyous occasion, their lives and their lifetime of happiness together would be taken from them in a manner no husband should ever be forced to watch. Today, we'll be talking about the brutally heartbreaking case of Yannick and Kiana Piasek. There's a lot of rainfall representing our team's tears in this one. Guys, the sadness of this case was honestly too much for us to handle, so we can only imagine the pain that this sweet couple's family has actually had to endure. Our most sincere condolences go out to them. Born on February 16, 1982, Kiana Faye Jenkins was the only child of Roy and Glenna Faye Jenkins. She grew up in the Ontario area of Southern California and ultimately attended San Diego State University, where she earned a master's degree in public health in 2005. Kiana worked as a health education assistant for the county's Black Infant Care Program with the goal of becoming a doctor. Yannick Paul Piasek, known as Jan to his friends, was born in Poland on March 13, 1984. His mother, Henrico Varga, said that he was named after Pope John Paul II. When Jan was 11 years old, his family immigrated to the United States, and he grew up in the Bensonhurst area of Brooklyn, New York. Deeply moved by the events of 9/11, Jan joined the Marines shortly afterward in 2003. He always wanted to serve in the military and give back to his adopted country. His mother recalled him saying, "Mom, we live in this country. We have to be patriotic. We have to give back." Jan served in Iraq as a helicopter mechanic and ultimately achieved the rank of sergeant. His friends and colleagues referred to him as Sergeant P or just P. In 2005, prior to Jan being deployed to Iraq, he and Kiana met at a party for Marines being deployed to Iraq. A mutual friend of theirs who attended San Diego State introduced them. Initially, Kiana was reluctant to date a Marine, but Piasek won her over. To every person that knew the young couple, they were genuinely and deeply in love, the kind of love and life partnership everyone hopes to find in life. Jan's mother shared, they were in love. It didn't matter to them that they had different skin colors. They were young, happy, and very much in love with a bright future, and many planned children ahead of them. On August 8, 2008, 26-year-old Kiana and 24-year-old Yan were married. Kiana's mother shared that her daughter chose that specific date so that Yan would always remember their anniversary. The couple would enjoy just 2 short months of happiness together before tragedy would strike in the form of pure evil. On October 15, 2008, when both Kiana and Yan failed to show up for work and no one could get in contact with them, co-workers from their respective jobs became concerned. They called the police to request a well check. When officers arrived at the home, they found the front door wide open and immediately called for backup. Upon entry, officers noticed a purse with its contents dumped onto the floor near the front door, and the house smelled like gasoline and natural gas. As soon as they entered the living room, they encountered Kiana and Yan's bound and gagged bodies on the floor. A vibrator and a red candle were found near Kiana. Yan had clearly been extensively and mercilessly beaten, and Kiana had been brutally sexually assaulted. Both had been tortured before being shot and killed. The home had been ransacked, and several small fires had been attempted but failed to ignite. Police discovered at least 3 distinct sets of shoe print patterns throughout the home, left by the murderers as they walked through the gasoline they used in their failed attempts to set fires. Among the shoe impressions were a Nike Air Force One sneaker and a Nike Cortez. Racial slurs were spray-painted on the walls and mirrors of the home. Police began questioning friends, family, and co-workers to see if anyone knew of individuals who may have had issues with the couple. They found that Yan was known as a strict person, holding people accountable if they didn't do things properly. He had recently received a large bonus of $30,000, which was widely known. Police considered these factors when evaluating potential suspects. Initially, the police suspected that the murders may have been a racially motivated hate crime given the slurs left at the crime scene. Surveillance footage from an ATM showed that Kiana's card had been used by the killers shortly after the murders, providing a grainy image of a suspect wearing a blue bandana and gloves with distinct writing on them. The Naval Criminal Investigative Services, NCIS, was called in to assist local investigators. During their inspection of the crime scene, NCIS immediately noticed that while numerous items of value appeared to have been stolen, a military duffel bag, also known as a sea bag, remained behind. This led them to believe that the perpetrators may be military personnel themselves, as they would already have access to such a bag. Local authorities agreed with the suspicion, especially since Kiana's ATM card had been used close to the rear gate of the camp, Pendleton Marine Corps Base. As detectives continued questioning friends and co-workers, one name repeatedly came up: 20-year-old Lance Corporal Tyrone Miller, who worked under Yan. Miller had expressed dislike for Yan to several people. Coincidentally, a few days after the murders, Miller was reportedly shot at a movie theater in what was described as a drive-by shooting. The proximity of the injury to the murders raised suspicions about Miller even higher. He was called in for questioning. During Miller's interrogation, he initially denied any involvement in the murders. However, when reminded that his cell phone records could be pulled, he recalled possibly driving through the couple's neighborhood with friends around the time of the murders. Police asked him about what he typically wore to such hangouts, and to their surprise, he mentioned wearing blue bandanas and owning various types of shoes, including Air Force Ones. This gave the police enough probable cause to search Miller's home. Upon executing the search warrant, the police encountered resistance from Miller and his wife, who refused to open the door. The police eventually rammed the door open and found Miller's wife in one direction and Miller holding his toddler daughter in front of himself as a shield. After convincing Miller to lower the child, the search of his home began. Early in the search, the police found Yan's ATM card lying on the table. They discovered the couple's stolen jewelry, spent shell casings, and hanging in Miller's closet, Yan's dress blue uniform, the uniform Marines are most proud of. Several handguns, including the murder weapon, were also found, along with a bag of blue bandanas and gloves matching the ones seen in the ATM surveillance video. Extensive DNA evidence was also uncovered. Additionally, the police found various stolen items and unrelated IDs, indicating that Miller may have been involved in other burglaries or crimes. Miller was taken into custody and interrogated again. Despite the overwhelming evidence found in his home, he continued to deny involvement in the murders. After approximately an hour of interrogation, he began to break but minimized his role in the crimes, claiming that he went there with the intent to perform a robbery. Miller eventually named two others involved in the crime: 18-year-old Lance Corporal Emery's John, who also worked under Yan, and 20-year-old Private Kevin Cox, who worked in the same squadron. Another participant, referred to as Psycho, was identified as 21-year-old Lance Corporal Keyshawn Sykes. All four suspects were brought in for questioning and admitted involvement in the crimes, but pointed fingers at each other regarding the shooting and rape. Through their statements from friends they had confessed to after the murder, and evidence found at each of their homes, the police were able to piece together the events of that fateful night. The perpetrators approached the Piasek home wearing blue bandanas and gloves, intending to break in secretly. When that failed, they used Cox to knock on the door, pretending to be someone Yan knew. Once Yan opened the door, a struggle ensued, and the four men rushed in at gunpoint. They bound and gagged Yan and Kiana, ransacked the home, and tortured the couple to obtain Kiana's PIN number. Yan was forced to watch as Miller and Sykes repeatedly raped and tortured Kiana. After several hours, Emery's John, under Miller's orders, executed the couple. Racial slurs were written on the bedroom and bathroom walls and mirrors in an attempt to misdirect suspicion. The perpetrators also tried to set the home on fire but failed. The motives for the murders were to obtain money and seek revenge. The perpetrators expected to find money and valuables in the house and wanted revenge for Yan allegedly obstructing Miller's promotion. However, there was no evidence to support that claim. Miller was the mastermind behind the plan, and it was revealed that the four Marines led a secret life of crime, regularly committing home invasions and burglaries. The accidental gunshot wound Miller received during a previous robbery attempt raised suspicions among the police. It was discovered that just before the murders, Emery's John had posted a statement on his MySpace page that indicated premeditation. Despite the official position of law enforcement that the crime was not racially motivated, public sentiment, including that of the victim's family, friends, and a top investigator, believed otherwise due to the couple's interracial relationship. Yan and Kiana were laid to rest on October 24th, with their families deciding to bury them together so they could spend eternity together, as they had planned. A full military funeral ceremony, including a 21-gun salute, was held for the couple, and they were buried in the Riverside National Cemetery. Kiana's mother said that she had prepared herself for the possibility of her son dying in Iraq, but never expected him to die in their own home. In March 2013, 5 years after the murders, 3 of the defendants, Miller, Johns, and Cox, went on trial. All 4 defendants had already been dishonorably discharged from the Marines. They were facing the death penalty. Prosecutor Daniel DeLeon emphasized to the jury that these killers were not ordinary citizens, but skillfully trained military personnel. He reminded them that these were United States Marines who had been trained in firearms and covert operations, and they had used that training to commit murder. During the trial, it was revealed through testimony that Miller and Cox had congratulated Emery's John, saying he had earned his stripes that night. Cox told John that he had grown up that night, to which John responded affirmatively. The first trial of the 3 defendants lasted 4 months, and the jury deliberated for less than 3 days. 1 year later, the second trial of Keyshawn Sykes took place due to limited court space. The verdicts were as follows. All 4 men were convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with special allegations related to the murders, such as them occurring during the commission of a robbery. John was convicted as the shooter, and Miller was additionally convicted of sexual assault. Sykes was also convicted of sexual assault, as well as sexual penetration with a foreign object. Miller, John, and Sykes were sentenced to death, while Cox received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Cox is currently serving his life sentence without the possibility of parole at Chuckawalla Valley State Prison. Chuckawalla is a medium-security prison that, at the time Cox was sent there, was operating at double its capacity, holding over 3,200 prisoners when it was designed for just over 1,700. As of 2022, it continues to operate at 125% capacity. Miller, John, and Sykes are currently on death row in California's San Quentin State Prison, which houses the state's only death row for male inmates and is the largest death row in the United States. All executions in California, for both male and female inmates, take place at San Quentin. Female inmates to be executed are transported there by bus. San Quentin, built in 1852, is the oldest prison in California and contains a gas chamber, although since 1996, all executions have been carried out by lethal injection. Death row at San Quentin is divided into 3 sections: North Segregation, which is for prisoners who do not cause trouble; East Block, a crumbly and leaky maze of a place built in 1927; and the Adjustment Center, which houses the most dangerous inmates. Most of the death row inmates reside in the East Block section. Solid doors have been installed on cells in the worst section to prevent attacks or inmates throwing bodily waste through the cell wires. In 2019, Governor of California Gavin Newsom ordered a moratorium on the death penalty in the state. As long as the moratorium remains in place, the 3 convicted murderers of the Piastek case, along with others on death row, will remain in prison. Unfortunately, there is limited information available about the day-to-day lives of the 4 prisoners. There has been significant online outrage regarding the killers in this case. General sentiment expresses sheer disgust that Marines would commit such acts against a fellow Marine and his innocent wife. Many believe that the 4 killers are not and never have been Marines, and thus are not even eligible to be called ex-Marines. The death penalty handed to 3 of the killers is seen by many as an insufficient punishment for the heinousness of their crimes. We would like to hear your thoughts on this matter. Were you as affected as we were by the idea of 4 men who were trained to kill, turning those skills on one of their own and his innocent wife? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you would like to see more videos like this, be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss a single video.
This monstrous story will not leave anyone indifferent. A 14-year-old girl went out for a walk and disappeared without a trace. She was searched for more than a month, and this investigation was the largest in 9 years. Thanks to hundreds of police officers and surveillance types, the mystery was solved, but the truth was far more confusing and shocking. In this video, we will tell you what happened to Alice Gross. Before we start, don't forget like video and subscribe for more. Alice Gross was born on Valentine's Day, February 14, 2000, in London. She grew up in a full, loving family. She also had an older sister. From an early age, the girl showed an affinity for creativity. She loved to draw and play the piano and violin. Later, Alice began to write her own gorgeous songs and perform them to her own music. In addition, the girl was fond of clothes design, and at age 11, she even made herself a dress which she planned to wear at a school graduation. When the girl was 13 years old, doctors diagnosed her with anorexia and depression. Despite all of this, Alice continued to pursue creativity and had every chance of achieving tremendous success in the future. On August 28, 2014, Alice told her mother that she was going on an outing. She had school vacations and plenty of free time, so the girl loved to walk along a small water canal and river near her home. The family lived in a suburb of London called Hanwell, and her usual route was 4.5 kilometers. The girl went out at about 3 p.m., promising her parents she would return around 6 p.m. She later texted her father that she would be home soon, but Alice did not return at the appointed time. When it was already 7 p.m. on the clock, her parents began to worry. They tried calling her, but her phone was off. The fact that Alice suffered from anorexia and depression only added to their anxiety. Her parents feared something might have happened to her because of her physical condition. She was constantly weak and could faint. Her parents called some of her friends in the hope that Alice might be with them, but no one had seen the girl that day. Her mother and father decided to call the police. They immediately began a search, and the first thing they did was to investigate the route Alice usually took. Her relatives and friends of the family also joined the search. Alas, they could not find any trace of the girl, but detectives were able to find several witnesses. Thanks to their testimony about the places where Alice had passed, the police were able to determine her route more accurately, which, in turn, allowed them to narrow the search area and select several street cameras that could have captured her. After examining the footage, detectives did locate Alice. Almost immediately after leaving the house, she was caught on the first camera heading along the Grand Union Canal. A short time later, she was spotted in the Bryan Ford area, which was further down the canal. The last time the camera captured her was on her way back near her home. The girl was walking near the Trampers Way Bridge. The police also reported the missing teenager to the media, and they broke the news about the case all over London. In the first hours after her disappearance, thanks to that, detectives received several calls from witnesses who had seen Alice. Unfortunately, none of this brought the police any closer to finding the girl. Based on camera footage and witness accounts, she disappeared on her way home, having traveled most of her usual route. But what happened to her remained a mystery. 3 days went by as police continued to examine camera footage in nearby neighborhoods and surveyed local parks and other secluded areas. At the same time, patrol officers went door to door to homes along Alice's route and asked questions of local residents. On September 1st, the girl's relatives recorded a video message begging her to return home. They also asked anyone who had any information about her whereabouts to contact the police. At the time, investigators were considering several theories. The first and most troubling was the kidnapping version. Despite the fact that most of Alice's route was along city streets, there were many remote and hidden areas where the girl might have been attacked. In addition, the London police often encountered situations where people were kidnapped right in the center, let alone in the suburbs. The second was a theory about running away from home. Alice's parents feared that the pressure might have driven her to such a decision. They also didn't rule out the possibility that the girl might have taken her own life because of her illness. But to the police, this version seemed unlikely. At 14, Alice was unlikely to be able to run away and hide, especially without help. And if she had taken her own life, she would very likely have been found by now. The case attracted more and more public attention every day, and on September 3rd, it was handed over to a special unit of Scotland Yard. Although they usually only worked on homicides, the detectives rated the chance of getting the girl home as high. Scotland Yard organized a large-scale search, which was immediately joined by hundreds of volunteers. After seeing the heartbreaking appeal of her parents and sister in the news, concerned Londoners combed the area from early morning until late at night. And the next day, detectives announced the discovery of the first tangible clue. They managed to find Alice's backpack, which contained her shoes worn that day. It was relatively close to her home. This find allowed the police to narrow their search, focusing on a small area near the canal. Investigators realized it was unlikely the girl had taken off her shoes herself, thrown them in with her backpack, and fled. She did not have a change of shoes with her, so the situation became more and more complicated. Scotland Yard decided to release all available surveillance footage of Alice. The backpack with the shoes indicated that the girl might be in serious danger. The main version was still an abduction, but the investigators did not completely rule out the possibility that the girl might have committed suicide. For that reason, they tried to use all available resources to locate her. The publication of the recordings might draw more attention among the public, and someone might remember seeing Alice that day. Along with that, several hundred more people from various agencies were involved in the search, and there were already 600 people working on the case. The investigation was thus the largest since 2005 in terms of the number of police officers involved. Some of them were directly surveying the area, while others were examining footage from hundreds of cameras that could have captured Alice. Scotland Yard also offered a £20,000 reward for any information that could help find the girl. Although police were unable to locate her phone, they asked the cell phone company for details of its last known location. It turned out that Alice had sent a message to her father from practically the same place where they would later find her backpack. Everything indicated that the investigators needed to focus on that particular location. The decision was made to conduct a thorough inspection of an area of several square kilometers. Every meter of land and water was examined manually. Police teams literally probed the river and canal bottoms for any evidence. 2 days after the discovery of the backpack, it became known that the police arrested a 25-year-old man on suspicion of Alice's murder. The next day, they arrested another man but refused to comment on the situation until all the details were clarified. However, soon both suspects were released, and Scotland Yard stated that they were unable to establish the involvement of these two people in Alice's disappearance. More than a week passed, and during all that time, there was no progress in the case. It was only on September 16th that the police made another statement. They said they were looking for a 41-year-old man named Arnie Salkins in connection with Alice's disappearance. He moved to England from Latvia 7 years ago, lived in the area, and worked as a construction worker. Scotland Yard became interested in him for two reasons that, at first glance, seemed unrelated. First, Arnie's co-worker reported him to the police about his disappearance as early as September 3rd. The man did not show up for work, did not answer his phone, and was not at home. It seemed as if he had simply vanished. Second, detectives found that Salkins' route from home to work was roughly the same route that the girl had taken the day she disappeared. All of this was not yet enough to draw any conclusions about the man's involvement in the girl's disappearance, but detectives soon discovered something really disturbing. In one of the camera recordings, they saw a middle-aged man riding his bicycle across the bridge where Alice had passed just a few minutes before. This man turned out to be Salkins. A short time later, he came to the next camera and the detectives noticed a very strange moment. The journey between these cameras should have taken only a few minutes, and it took the man on the bicycle practically a whole hour to ride down this road. A reasonable question arose: what was he doing all that time on such a short stretch? The police investigated the area and concluded that he could not have taken the longer route to the next cell because there simply was none. Even more disturbing was the fact that all this was taking place in the very area where Alice's path was allegedly cut short. The cops also concluded that the man's clothes were wet when he pulled onto the road. Continuing to study the cameras, detectives noticed Salkins on his bicycle returning to the same location 2 hours later after riding back out 50 minutes later. In doing so, he was not caught on the camera located on the bridge. This indicated that the man had spent all that time inside a small blind spot. Besides, he was already wearing different clothes. About an hour later, he was caught on a camera at a local store buying beer. The next morning, the situation repeated itself. Salkins returned to the same spot between the cameras at about 7 o'clock and also returned there again in the evening. All this was enough to get a search warrant for his house. It turned out that the man was living there with his girlfriend and their 2 daughters. Together, his roommate also had no idea where Salkins had gone. When she learned that he was suspected of killing the girl, she stated that Arnie's could never do something like that. She described him as a caring and loving father. Along with this, Scotland Yard examined the man's biography and discovered a truly creepy moment. It turned out that Salkins had a rich criminal past. In 1998, being in Latvia, he killed his wife in cold blood and calculatedly, having dug a grave for her in the woods. For this, he got only 7 years in prison. After serving his sentence, he moved to England, and the local law enforcement agencies did not even know about his criminal record in his home country. Police officers searched Salkins' home and found a recently excavated plot of land on his property. They did not disclose whether they found any evidence there, but a significant find awaited them in the basement of their house. A broken back panel from a white iPhone 4S was found there. Alice had the exact same phone. After examining the contents of his computer, the police also discovered that the man had searched the internet for information about Alice Gross's disappearance a few days after the incident. Based on all this, Arnie Salkins was put on the wanted list. Scotland Yard feared that the man might have fled back to Latvia or another European country, so they searched all over the EU, but law enforcement authorities were unable to find a single trace of the suspect. Meanwhile, a month had passed since Alice's disappearance, and on September 30th, the police issued a depressing statement. A human body was found in a river near the girl's disappearance. At the time, the identity was not yet known, but the police shared one eerie fact: someone had gone to great lengths to arrange for the body to remain underwater and not resurface. Only the next day, law enforcement authorities confirmed that the deceased was Alice Gross. Though no one doubted it anymore, the scene was in the exact spot where she had disappeared. The cause of death was asphyxiation. It turned out that Alice's body had been wrapped in construction bags and tied to a large tree stump. In addition, the perpetrator made a whole structure out of a bicycle wheel and bricks, which also prevented the body from surfacing. She also had no clothes on except for one sock. Detectives paid a visit to the setup where Salkins worked and discovered that the same bags used to hide Alice's body were the same ones used at his construction site. After the discovery of the body, police continued to search for Salkins, working closely with Interpol and local European intelligence agencies, but they were still unable to find any trace of him. This went on until October 4th when investigators made an unexpected discovery. They discovered the man's suspended body in a park just 1 kilometer from where Alice was murdered. 2 days later, experts confirmed that the deceased was Arnie Salkins. No one expected such a turn of events. The main version of Scotland Yard was the escape of the suspect to Europe. Well, in fact, it turned out that all this time he was under their noses. Medical experts concluded that the man had committed suicide on the day of his disappearance, September 3rd, and that he could not be found for a month. Nothing surprising here, however. Salkins had chosen a very remote and hard-to-reach location where he was extremely difficult to spot. With Salkins' DNA in hand, investigators had even more evidence. Near where Alice's body was found, police found a cigarette butt, which was sent to a lab. Experts extracted DNA from the filter, which matched the Salkins sample. In addition, the lab said that it was highly likely that the perpetrator's DNA was found on the victim's body. They could not assert this with 100% certainty due to how long the body had been in the water. His DNA was also found on the girl's backpack and shoes. By that time, the police had discovered another gruesome fact. It turned out that 2 years after moving to England, Salkins had molested a 14-year-old girl just a kilometer away from where Alice's body was found. A man attempted some indecent act, but the victim survived and the man was arrested. This is where the fun part begins. The girl did not press formal charges and the perpetrator was simply released. It is not entirely clear how this could have happened, but the fact remains an adult man molested a girl, fell into the hands of the police, and escaped punishment. Moreover, information about this case surfaced after the perpetrator's body was found in the park. Despite all this, the police continued to investigate, and it took them some time to put together a picture of what had happened. According to their version, on an unfortunate day, August 28th, Salkins was riding his bicycle along the same route where Alice was walking. Having noticed her in a secluded area hidden from prying eyes, he attacked her in order to commit depraved acts. How events unfolded next, we shall never know, but the outcome was tragic. Salkins killed Alice and then hid her body in several approaches, constantly returning to the place. We will also never know why he decided to take his own life after what he had done. Whether this can be called a manifestation of conscience is very debatable. Alice's parents, who survived such a terrible tragedy, were outraged by the government's actions. They were perplexed how the British authorities allowed a convicted murderer to enter the country and stay here to live. They had spent years fighting for the government to increase its control over migrants and keep criminals out. Unfortunately, to this day, they have been unable to make any serious changes. A month after the discovery of Salkins' body, another interesting event occurred. The medical examiner in charge of the investigation left a folder of case documents on the train. The 30 pages contained important information about the murder, including medical information and undisclosed details. The public, the media, and Alice's parents harshly criticized the police, but there was nothing they could do about it. However, no one tried to judge the deceased perpetrator anyway. The investigator said that if he were alive, they would have had enough evidence to bring the case to court, but there was no guarantee of a conviction. The problem was that all the evidence against Salkins was circumstantial, and he had a small chance of getting away with it. Instead, a hearing was held in court in which the jury admitted an already obvious fact: Alice had been murdered. Her death was not an accident. The procedure was formal and played no role. Alice's funeral was held on October 23rd. Thousands of people came out to the memorial that day, and at the end of the ceremony, a beautiful song that the girl wrote and sang herself was shown on the big screen. Like the video if they found it appealing, and subscribe and channel. In a foreign, tranquil American town, a horrific incident sent shockwaves through the community. A young girl vanished from her own residence, leaving behind her personal belongings, phone and car, without a single clue. As time went on, the investigation of this puzzling case started mirroring a conventional detective series, with one stark distinction: this was all unfolding in reality. The small town became immersed in an ambience of fear and suspicion, for the girl's disappearance potentially implicated any of its residents. However, it took a staggering 12 years for the chilling truth to be unveiled, reverberating throughout the entire world. Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. Tara Grinstead was born in 1974 in Hawkinsville, USA. During her high school years, she actively participated in beauty contests, winning prizes. From an early age, Tara set a goal to obtain a quality education, so she saved the money earned from competitions to pay for her studies. After college, Tara earned a master's degree in education and landed her dream job as a high school history teacher in Ocilla, Georgia. Ocilla was a tiny town, typical of low-rise America, with a population of no more than 4,000 people who mostly knew each other well. Life in Ocilla was quiet and predictable, with no one suspecting that any serious crime could occur there. Tara Grinstead had worked at the local school for several years and had built strong relationships with both staff and students. She was known as a kind and outgoing person, always supportive and helpful. In October 2005, her help became valuable to her students who were preparing for a local beauty pageant. The girls were thrilled to have Tara's support. On Saturday, October 22nd, Tara assisted the students with their final preparations for the pageant. Afterward, she attended a picnic with her high school friends and didn't return home until 11 p.m. She parked her car outside under a carport, and from that point on, Tara ceased all contact. Her mother, who lived in another city, grew increasingly worried as Tara always picked up the phone or returned calls. However, this time, there was no answer. On Monday, October 24th, Tara's anxiety peaked when she didn't show up for work. This behavior was highly unusual for her, as she took her job seriously and would have informed her superiors if she needed time off. Concerned acquaintances contacted Police Chief Billy Hancock and asked him to check on her well-being. At 10 a.m., he went to her address, initially assuming her phone was dead or that she was sick and had overslept. When Chief Hancock arrived at Tara's house, he found her car in its usual spot with unlocked doors, which was not surprising in such a small town where car theft wasn't a concern. He noticed an envelope on the dashboard containing $100 in cash, which was already strange, considering Tara's responsible nature. Billy knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Deciding to investigate further, he explored the house. At first glance, everything seemed perfectly ordinary with no signs of struggle or break-in. However, in Tara's bedroom, he discovered a real mess, highly uncharacteristic for her. Her belongings, including the clothes she had last been seen in, were strewn on the floor. Her cell phone was on the nightstand, charging, indicating that Tara had left the house briefly, but she was nowhere to be found. Outside the house, the police found a latex glove, a potential piece of evidence suggesting foul play. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the equivalent of the FBI at the state level, became involved in the case. The primary focus of the investigation was kidnapping, with little evidence beyond the latex glove. Detectives found 2 more curious items: Tara's torn chain on the bedroom floor and her alarm clock out of place. However, these findings did not provide much help in solving the mystery of her disappearance. For the small town, that Monday was a truly dreadful day. Tara's house was cordoned off, and the school held a meeting where Sarah's co-workers and students rallied to support the search effort. Volunteers formed a group, printing out flyers with Tara's picture and information about her disappearance. Within hours, the flyers were posted throughout the city. Volunteers stayed home until 1 a.m., while agents from the Bureau of Investigation interviewed Tara's neighbors and thoroughly investigated the neighborhood. Sniffer dogs were brought in to aid the search, hoping to pick up Tara's trail if she had left on foot. Simultaneously, the latex glove was handed over to experts to collect as much data as possible. The investigators clung to the hope that they would find Tara and unravel the mystery behind her sudden vanishing. Despite the efforts to find a match in the FBI database, investigators obtained a DNA sample from the scene of Tara's disappearance, but it did not yield any matches. All they knew was that the sample belonged to a man. Frustratingly, this led to no breakthroughs, and Tara seemed to have vanished as if into thin air from her own home. In a new direction, investigators delved into Tara's personal life and past, a common approach when a woman goes missing. Often, someone from her inner circle is implicated. After scrutinizing Tara's romantic relationships, detectives focused on Marcus Harper, a former policeman and military officer with whom Tara had been in a relationship. However, no solid suspects emerged during the investigation. Tara had initiated the breakup about a year before her disappearance, desiring to build a family while Marcus was not ready for that commitment. Despite their separation, they maintained a cordial relationship, communicating via calls and texts. Detectives later unearthed an intriguing detail: Marcus had visited Isola 3 weeks prior to Tara's disappearance, but he had not informed her. Learning about Marcus's visit through mutual acquaintances deeply upset Tara, prompting her repeated calls to him in an attempt to understand why he had kept it a secret. Tara's emotional state escalated into hysteria, causing great concern among her relatives, who worried she might act recklessly. However, she eventually regained composure, and the police did not consider Marcus a suspect. Their relationship had ended, and no apparent motive for the crime could be established. The investigation took another twist when it was revealed that Tara had received threats from a former student. On March 30, 2005, 7 months prior to her disappearance, the student had gone to Tara's house and displayed extremely aggressive behavior. When Tara refused to let him in, he began banging on the door, prompting neighbors to call the police. It was discovered that the young man had been infatuated with Tara since high school, and according to acquaintances, he exhibited emotional instability and peculiar, even alarming behavior. Tara had tried to assist him with his problems for a while, but his mental state only deteriorated. After the incident of him attempting to break into her house, Tara filed a report against him, genuinely fearing for her safety. The investigation continued with these new leads, as detectives explored the possibilities surrounding the troubled former student and his potential involvement in Tara's disappearance. After Tara's disappearance, the police tracked down the young man who had previously threatened her. He was working in a neighboring town approximately 150 kilometers away from Masilla. The young man provided detectives with an alibi for the nights surrounding Tara's disappearance, making it difficult to establish his involvement in the case. Additionally, a business card belonging to a police officer was found in Tara's house. It was discovered that Tara had been dating this officer for some time, but at the time of her disappearance, he had already relocated to another city. The policeman also provided an alibi for the time period in question, effectively removing him from the list of suspects. With no solid leads at hand, the police made the decision to organize a search for Tara 2 weeks after she went missing. This delayed response raised questions, as it was evident from the beginning that Tara had not left her home willingly. Hundreds of volunteers were called upon to search the surrounding area, combing through forests, ditches, and rivers. Unfortunately, not a single trace of Tara was found during the search. During this time, there was also a report of a housing car burning down near Tara's residence. The locals, almost unanimously, believed that the incident was connected to her disappearance. Speculation arose, suggesting that the perpetrator may have been attempting to cover their tracks, or the residents, deeply shocked and frightened, found every event suspicious in light of Tara's mysterious vanishing. Despite the exhaustive search efforts, the police faced the harsh reality that they had run out of leads. The following years brought no closer to solving the mystery surrounding Tara's disappearance. However, in 2009, an unexpected event thrust Tara Grinstead back into the spotlight. A YouTube channel was created by an unidentified user, featuring an eerie video. The video depicted a man whose face was obscured and voice altered, claiming involvement in the disappearances of 16 girls, including Tara Grinstead. The man further stated that he had securely hidden the bodies and would provide clues about their burial sites in subsequent videos. The police swiftly investigated the video and confirmed that all 16 names mentioned did indeed belong to missing women. The FBI managed to track down the creator of the video, a 27-year-old man named Andrew Haley. Upon his arrest, Andrew claimed that it was all a joke. The police, however, could not establish any connection between Andrew and the missing girls. Nevertheless, Andrew faced charges of perjury and tampering with evidence. He was sentenced to 2 years of forced labor and 13 years of probation. The momentary hopes of solving this cold case faded once again, leaving the police without any viable leads. In December 2010, Tara Grinstead was officially declared dead due to the lack of evidence. As the years went by, the townspeople retained vivid memories of Tara's disappearance, but the discussion of her case became increasingly infrequent, confined behind closed doors. The impact of Tara's disappearance had forever altered the town, leaving behind a lingering atmosphere of fear and mistrust for years to come. In 2016, journalist Payne Lindsay from Atlanta created a podcast dedicated to unsolved mysteries, with the Tara Grinstead case as its first focus. Alongside private investigator Morris Godwin, they traveled to Asilla and started working on the case with limited access to police records. Their main source of information became the townspeople. Initially, they could only speak to Tara's friends and relatives, as outsiders avoided discussing the missing girl. However, Lindsay's enthusiasm reignited interest in the case, prompting discussions throughout Asilla. Lindsay and Godwin painstakingly explored every lead, considering 3 possible suspects: Tara's ex-boyfriends and the students who had attempted to break into her house. Along the way, they interviewed anyone who might have valuable information. The duo's passion for the case led them to believe that a breakthrough was just within reach on several occasions. One day, Lindsay received an anonymous call suggesting they search Tara's property for remains. The police followed the tip, but the discovered bones were determined to be of animal origin. Despite the excitement and renewed interest generated by the podcast, no significant progress was made in solving the case during its creation. However, the amateur investigation proved crucial for the eventual breakthrough. In early 2017, Brooke Sheridan approached the police with a shocking story. She revealed that her ex-boyfriend, Bo Dukes, had confessed to helping his friend dispose of Tara Grinstead's body. Initially skeptical due to the recent surge in attention surrounding the case, the detectives cautiously approached the matter. They equipped Brooke with a wire and instructed her to seek a confession from Bo Dukes. To their surprise, Bo did not deny his involvement when confronted by Brooke wearing the wire. This provided the police with probable cause to arrest him. Bo cooperated fully with the investigation, revealing the truth behind Tara's disappearance. According to Bo's account, his friend and former classmate, Ryan Duke, had called him late one night, requesting to borrow a truck for an undisclosed task. Ryan then disclosed that he had broken into Tara Grinstead's house to steal money, but something had gone wrong, leading to her death. Ryan claimed that after a party, while under the influence of drugs, he decided to break into a house to find money, ultimately choosing Tara's residence. A struggle ensued between Tara and Ryan, resulting in her death. Bo arrived at Tara's house with a truck, and together they loaded her body into it before driving her to a wooded area where they disposed of her remains. The shocking nature of this revelation rocked the residents of Asilla. Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke had never been considered suspects, as there was no apparent motive or evidence linking them to Tara's disappearance. Despite Bo's full confession, he chose not to testify against himself in court. During the trial, he expressed remorse and apologized to Tara's relatives for his actions, shedding tears for what he had done. Bo Dukes, who had an extensive military background with numerous decorations, was found guilty of helping cover up Tara Grinstead's murder. His sentencing included 25 years in prison. Ryan Duke's murder trial for Tara Grinstead was initially scheduled for April 1, 2019, but it was postponed on March 28, 2019, by the Georgia Supreme Court due to the alleged denial of funding for expert witnesses on Duke's behalf. The trial finally commenced on May 9, 2022. During the trial, Ryan Duke pleaded not guilty to murder, while Bo Dukes was charged with murder. On May 20, 2022, the jury found Ryan Duke not guilty of murder and aggravated assault but guilty of concealment of death. Ryan Duke testified in court, stating that his previous confessions to the murder were false, claiming that he had made them under the influence of drugs and out of fear of the actual killer, a friend with a similar last name, Bo Dukes. Ryan Duke testified that Bo Dukes woke him up in their shared mobile home in 2005 and confessed to killing Tara Grinstead, showing him her purse and wallet as evidence. Although Tara's body was never found, investigators matched her DNA to bone fragments discovered in the location Ryan Duke had mentioned. On May 23, 2022, Ryan Duke was sentenced by the judge in Irwin County Superior Court to 10 years in prison for concealing the body. This was the maximum penalty allowed. By the time of his sentencing, Ryan Duke had already served approximately half of that sentence. Throughout the trial, prosecutors argued that Duke's confession contained details that only the actual killer could have known, such as the phone call he claimed to have made from a payphone to Tara Grinstead's home after running away and returning to find her gone. Duke's DNA was also found on a latex glove discovered in Grinstead's yard. However, his testimony created enough doubt in the minds of the jury, leading to his acquittal on all charges except concealing her death. Bo Dukes was subpoenaed to testify but invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and refused to answer the court's questions. When the truth about this high-profile case was revealed, Tara Grinstead's friends and relatives finally found some relief from the burden of uncertainty. Tara's mother admitted that she had secretly hoped for a miracle all these years, hoping that her daughter would return alive. Unfortunately, reality proved to be cruel, senseless, and devoid of miracles. At least now, the entire world knows the truth about what happened in that small town back in 2005. If you like this video, write your opinion about it and give it a like. Take care and thanks for watching. Thank you.
When we think of cartel violence, we usually think of the Medellin cartel, Pablo Escobar's ruthless and bloody empire. However, there is an even more violent cartel in Mexico. Up until 2010, Mexican cartels fought over authority and territory, but extreme violence wasn't the norm. Declaring war on police officers and civilians certainly wasn't the norm either. However, when Los Zetas split from the Gulf Cartel, they brought an unprecedented level of brutality to Mexico. Kidnappings, bombings, beheadings, and civilian murders started plaguing the country on a daily basis. It was a decade of sheer terror and panic before Los Zetas finally started succumbing to the government's efforts and the growing power of rival cartels. Trigger warning: the following video discusses topics of extreme violence. This is your chance to turn back. This is the full story of the Los Zetas cartel. On New Year's Day, 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement saw a new level of collaboration between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. The cartels hated this. An extremist group called the Zapatista Army of National Liberation launched an armed rebellion in southern Mexico. But this only prompted the Mexican army to take arms as well. And this time the US got involved too, training the Mexican Army's special forces. The United States had a school where it trained many military officers from Latin America inside its own borders. In 1997, Osiel Cardenas Gillen took control of the Gulf Cartel and found himself in the middle of a brutal turf war. To strengthen his position, he employed a retired Army lieutenant, Arturo Guzman de Sena, to recruit dozens of Army deserters from the Mexican Army's special forces. They were to become Cardenas' personal bodyguards, known as Zetas or Zs in Spanish. This is how the Gulf Cartel's army became known as Los Zetas. From the very beginning, their primary goal was to destroy any enemies of the cartel, from rival gangs to the police. There was a noticeable change in the way Los Zetas fought. It was no longer just gang members with shaved heads and tattoos fighting with pistols and knives. They adopted a militarized style of fighting, resembling military units. This approach spread across every cartel in Mexico. Within the Gulf Cartel, violence was just a means to an end. Cartel bosses would order the assassination of rival kingpins to secure more power, and violent shootouts would ensure turf victories. However, with Los Zetas, it was a completely different story. These former specially trained soldiers already had a knack for senseless brutality and organized attacks. Now, they were encouraged to be as brutal as they could be. They were even rewarded with honor medals if they outdid their peers in terms of violence or kill count. This really upped the ante of violence in their conflict. They used terror as a weapon, drawing on their military background and the anti-insurgency training they had received, which originated in the United States. Cartels were now pressured to grow their armies and strategize more as the Gulf Cartel threatened to take over. However, until the war on drugs began in the early 2000s, the violence remained contained within the cartel world. Los Zetas were still contained within the Gulf Cartel, but it would soon escalate beyond anything imaginable. In 2002, Mexican authorities killed Arturo Guzman de Sena as part of their kingpin strategy to dissolve cartels by removing their leaders. Just a few months later, they arrested Osiel Cardenas Gillen. For a few years, he continued to lead the Gulf Cartel from prison, similar to Escobar's situation in the early 1990s. But in 2007, Cardenas was extradited to the US. The Gulf Cartel was left in the hands of whoever was ruthless enough to grab it. And who else but its own army, Los Zetas? However, Los Zetas didn't take control of the Gulf Cartel. They broke away and formed their own cartel in February 2010. Needless to say, This started a terrible war between the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas, which escalated further in August 2010. The Mexican military stumbled upon a mass grave, and as they began examining it, they were shocked to discover the bodies of 72 undocumented immigrants whom Los Zetas had intercepted and killed. This was due to their fear that the immigrants would be recruited by the Gulf Cartel. In April 2011, Los Zetas intercepted several buses heading towards two towns bordering Texas. They kidnapped hundreds of innocent people and executed 193 individuals on a San Fernando ranch. The brutality was horrific, with women being violated and men enduring hours of mutilation before their deaths. Some men were even forced to fight each other to the death, all for Los Zetas' amusement. The few survivors were recruited by Los Zetas based on the suspicion that they might be Gulf Cartel recruits. These attacks were not based on factual information. Later that year, in August, Los Zetas set fire to a casino in Monterrey, resulting in the death of 52 civilians. Their motive was the casino's refusal to pay protection money. Less than a year later, the Monterrey police discovered 49 decapitated bodies dumped on the highway by Los Zetas after a clash with the Sinaloa cartel. In 2014, Los Zetas suspected two men of stealing money from the cartel. In response, they rushed to their hometown of Allende and reduced 80 homes to ashes, resulting in the loss of between 300 and 500 lives. These were unprecedented numbers, even for the most ruthless cartel kingpins globally. Los Zetas also engaged in the horrifying practice of preparing guisos, which involved taking a family member, placing them in a pig boiler, pouring gasoline on them, and setting them on fire. Los Zetas ruled through fear, not money, power, or respect. They were not interested in the typical cartel business of controlling trade routes into the US. Instead, they aimed to seize territory by holding people hostage, killing, and maiming until they gained control. Los Zetas had become more of an invading army than a traditional cartel. Their activities expanded beyond narcotics trafficking to include local drug sales, extortion, kidnapping, car theft, selling pirated goods, and corrupting labor unions. In 2010, Los Zetas targeted Pemex, the national Mexican oil company, and engaged in large-scale theft using tanker trucks. They stole large quantities of oil by attaching hoses to unload the tanks and load the stolen gas into their own trucks. This oil theft proved more profitable than the complex process involved in the white powder trade, which includes production and smuggling. Shockingly, several U.S. companies were discovered to be buying stolen oil from Los Zetas. Legal actions were taken against 5 Texas companies involved in this illicit trade. With their militarized power, Los Zetas operated with impunity, leaving the authorities powerless. Harassment, intimidation, and theft from Pemex staff were common occurrences. Innocent people often found themselves caught in the crossfire as cartels fought against each other, with the Pemex staff becoming unwitting victims. Living in constant fear, people had to be ready to run at a moment's notice. However, for Los Zetas, this was just an everyday part of doing business. The DEA declared Los Zetas the most aggressive and technologically advanced Mexican organized group. They appeared invincible, striking terror into the hearts of everyone. However, Mexican authorities never ceased their fight against them. Foreign authorities continued their kingpin strategy within the war on drugs. In October 2012, the Mexican Navy killed Los Zetas commander, Heriberto Lascano. His right-hand man, Miguel Angel Treviño Morales, took charge. Morales, though lacking a military background, exhibited extreme brutality, even towards his own soldiers. He engaged in horrific acts such as boiling and burning. Victims alive. Under Morales' leadership, Los Zetas transformed into a gang of monsters and thugs. As Mexican authorities relentlessly targeted the top leaders of Los Zetas, the group became increasingly fragmented, unreliable, and less profitable. Oil theft decreased, and the drug trade was secured by the notorious Sinaloa cartel, led by El Chapo and El Mayo, who possessed the necessary international connections and logistics. Los Zetas shifted their focus to kidnappings and extortions, but these activities rarely generated significant profits and caused immense pain and suffering. The Mexican army was hot on their trail. In an ironic twist, the Jalisco New Generation cartel drew inspiration from Los Zetas' extreme violence and military-style fighting. They emulated and surpassed them, slowly reducing Los Zetas to ashes alongside the Sinaloa cartel. Morales was arrested, and the remaining members either joined the CJNG, were killed, or captured. Unfortunately, the extreme brutality initiated by Los Zetas only served to inspire further violence within other cartels.
Yo lo mato. Ah, Chile, presta. Tu madre, que se duerme luego, mamo. Y pues todo, pues, se hizo como un guion de James Bond.
The CJNG, in particular, has taken violence to new heights, utilizing explosive tactics and attacking police officers and civilians with militarized drones. They continue to terrorize Mexican communities, perpetuating a cycle of violence. The thirst for revenge fuels these cartels, and many members derive pleasure from spreading terror and taking lives. The question remains, how will the violence ever end if cartels keep recruiting new members and exposing them to a world where fear reigns as the only currency? The dissolution of the violent Mexican cartels remains an ongoing challenge for the authorities. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section, and before you go, don't forget to like and subscribe.
In 1999, a mysterious disappearance occurred in the United States that still haunts people's minds today. An 11-year-old girl was left alone for 90 seconds and literally vanished. Years later, police would find a bill with "I am alive" written on it in the girl's name. In this video, we've compiled all the information we have on what happened to Michaela Biggs on January 2, 1999 in the American city of Mesa, Arizona. Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. Two sisters, 11-year-old Michaela and 9-year-old Kimber, were walking close to home. It was a chilly evening, and it was just beginning to get dark outside. Despite the height of winter, Arizona is a warm southern state, so Michaela brought her bike and rode alongside her sister. At one point, the girls thought they heard the sound of an approaching ice cream truck. They put speakers on them and turned on music to alert children to the approach of a favorite treat. The girls hurried home to ask their mother and change for ice cream, then returned to the street. However, the ice cream truck was nowhere to be found, and the girls began to wait. At some point, Kimber got cold. She told her sister that she would run inside to get a jacket and come back. When she arrived back, Michaela was no longer there. The bike was lying on the road with its wheels still spinning. Beside it lay the 2 coins the girls had prepared to buy ice cream. Kimber came home and told her mother that Michaela was missing. Neither she nor her mother had yet allowed even the thought that anything could have happened to the girl. The mother thought that Michaela had gone to a neighbor with whom the family was friendly, but the girl was not there, and the mother realized that something terrible might have happened to her daughter. Immediately thereafter, she went to the police. It is worth noting that the police response was very fast. Already in 30 minutes, a helicopter was in the air. The law enforcers stopped all suspicious cars, bypassed the surrounding houses. That day, volunteers from the girls' school handed out and posted flyers with her picture. Those pictures would later appear in storefronts and on billboards along roads throughout Arizona. Police searched dumpsters and inspected hundreds of homes. Detective Butch Gates and Jerry Giselle were assigned to the case. The cops questioned every ice cream vendor in the state and could not establish that at least one of them was in that area at the time of the girl's disappearance. Detectives reconstructed the chronology of events and came to an eerie conclusion: the girl disappeared in just 90 seconds. That's how long Kimber had been missing. The spinning wheel on the bicycle confirmed the fact that the abduction had taken place extremely quickly. Search dogs, the help of which was used by the investigation, could not get a trace of the girl. And when they did, they took only a few steps in the direction of the road. The fact that the dog takes the mark of the person only when the missing person left on their feet only reinforced the main version of the police. The girl was put in a car, taken away, and it all happened in a matter of seconds. The situation was complicated by the complete lack of witnesses. Despite the fact that the girls were playing in a street filled with houses, none of the neighbors saw them that night. Later, there was information that a man tried to kidnap the 2 girls right out of school. The children were 10 and 11 years old at the time. Police checked the information for a connection to the disappearance of Michaela, who was just 11, but the kidnapping turned out to be a failed prank. There was less and less evidence, so police began working out the standard theories. When a child goes missing, parents and other relatives are always checked, given that Michaela's mother was at home. At the time of the kidnapping, investigators took on the girl's father, Darian Biggs. From the beginning, no one really believed in his involvement. Why would a father kidnap his own daughter, especially in such a way, in the middle of the street, in a short period of time when his other daughter was running home? However, it soon became clear that the man had lied about his alibi. During the first interrogation, he stated that he was at work at the time of the abduction, which turned out to be untrue. In reality, he was spending time with his mistress. What happened next was even more interesting. The man failed the polygraph questioning, and his wife admitted that she knew about the cheating. Darian himself had told her about it a month before it happened. The couple thought about divorce. Despite the fake alibi, the police eventually stopped considering the father as a suspect. Even in the event of a divorce, his wife had no plans to forbid him from seeing his children. He simply had no motive. In addition, the detectives acknowledged that the lie detector results may have been influenced by the emotional state of the father, whose daughter had just been abducted. He may even have laid some of the blame on himself and thought that if he had been home with his family, the tragedy could have been avoided. Detectives also tracked Darian's movements that evening and determined that he simply would not have had time to hide Michaela. The man showed up at home very quickly after his spouse called him to report his daughter missing. Detective Giselle later stated that Michaela most likely did not know her abductor. If it had been the father, she would not have thrown the bicycle and change on the ground. The girl tried to run away from the stranger but simply did not make it. During the investigation, police regularly have leads that led nowhere. An anonymous man called detectives and reported that Michaela's body was in an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. Police combed the area but found nothing. Later, they received an email from an anonymous man claiming that he was the one who had kidnapped the girl. The FBI fairly quickly traced the sender's IP address and sent a SWAT team to his home in the city of Phoenix. It turned out that the sender was a 12-year-old boy who had just decided to make a joke. Meanwhile, the police had reached a stalemate, beginning to process even the most incomprehensible theories. They combed through 35 abandoned gold mines in the county and then even questioned nearly 500 psychics who could supposedly help the investigation. Of course, this went nowhere. One witness was found who had seen a mint-colored Jeep shortly before Michaela was kidnapped. The driver was quickly found and proved innocent. After that, the police were already desperate to find the girl because there was literally not a single clue left in front of them. This went on until September 27, 1999, when the quiet county was shocked by another event. A woman living near Biggs returned home and walked into the kitchen to find a middle-aged man with his pants unbuttoned. Without uttering a word, he jumped on the woman and began strangling and abusing her. The perpetrator then set fire to the house and left. Apparently, the attacker thought his victim was dead, but the woman survived. Her neck was broken, but she was able to reach the phone and call an ambulance. Already on her way to the hospital, she whispered to the doctors from her last breath, "Michaela Biggs, the girl who is missing, he took her, you must save her." The whole town was shocked again, and events swirled rapidly. The police took up the case and arrested the assailant. He turned out to be D. Bullock, a well-known alcoholic in the area who lived with his wife and 3 children, repaired wrecked cars, and occasionally disrupted public order. His house was only 2 blocks from Biggs. D was one of the first to volunteer to help find Michaela and willingly let the police into the house to search, but not into the trailer in the backyard. For the trailer, he demanded a warrant. This behavior was extremely bizarre. A man with a bad reputation volunteering to help find a missing girl, giving the police a look around his house without any questions, and suddenly forbidding them to look in the trailer. From then on, Bullock became the prime suspect, even though his wife provided him with an alibi for the time Michaela was kidnapped. No one believed her story, and most likely she was just afraid of her husband. Detectives began digging into Bullock's past and discovered that he had been tried 3 times for violence and molestation, as well as for kidnapping minors. He didn't get out of prison until 1995. And at that time, none of the neighbors had any idea what kind of monster lived next door. Several times a week, Michaela took private piano lessons from a neighbor who lived across the street from Bullock's house. This suggested that the man may have known the girl long before she disappeared. After Bullock was arrested for assaulting the woman, the police searched his house again and planned to investigate the trailer he had kept them out of earlier. But they were disappointed. The trailer had disappeared without a trace. This was a major blow to Michaela's parents. They were sure their daughter was there, alive or not, but she had disappeared, and the police were unable to trace her location. Bullock was sentenced to 15.5 years in prison for the September 27, 1999 attack on the woman. He categorically denied any involvement in Michaela's disappearance. This was not surprising, for the attack on his neighbor and the atrocities he committed. 15 years in prison would be a lenient sentence by U.S. standards. A confession to kidnapping an 11-year-old girl, on the other hand, could have landed him straight in the electric chair. The parents could not accept that their only hope for the truth was gone. The mother and father wrote Bullock a letter directly to the prison, asking the ultimate question, whether he had anything to do with Michaela's disappearance. No one hoped to get a confession, but the criminal's answer took them by surprise. He wrote that the conversation was too personal and suggested that her parents visit him in prison. At that moment, hope rekindled in the hearts of the parents. The Bullock would confess, but they were greatly disappointed sitting across from the perpetrator. The father asked if he had anything to do with his daughter's disappearance. Bullock simply replied that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. The conversation continued in this vein for several more minutes, after which the perpetrator simply picked up and left accompanied by security. It looked as if he was just teasing the parents, giving them false hope and destroying it by looking them in the eye. For a sadist like Bullock, the suffering of others can bring unsurpassed pleasure. This is apparently why he arranged the meeting with the grief-stricken parents. Afterwards, Michaela's father confessed that he was convinced that Bullock was involved. He stated, "I was sitting a few feet away from the guy who killed my daughter and there was nothing I could do about it." At this point, even the most staunch hopes of solving the case were abandoned. Absolutely everyone believed that no new leads would ever emerge. Years later, they would realize that they were wrong, but more on that later. On the 5th anniversary of Michaela's disappearance, the parents buried an empty coffin, finally saying goodbye to their daughter. During this time, their marriage broke up. They changed residence and were reluctant to contact journalists. Until 2018, the case went into a long drawer. The police simply had nothing to work with. But out of the blue, an event occurred that stirred up all of America. On March 14, 2018, a dollar bill was accidentally dropped at a police station in Neenah, Wisconsin. On it was written in stubby handwriting, "My name is Michaela Biggs, kidnapped from Mass, I am alive." The bill was found by a local resident who was collecting coins and dollar bills in a jar. He was the one who came across the dollar, after which he reported the find to the police, and they instantly reopened the investigation. Michaela's mother rushed nearly 2,000 miles away to look at the handwriting and see if the message was actually written by her daughter. Other relatives also came to the station, but they all made a disappointing statement. The handwriting looked nothing like Michaela's, and the name was misspelled. The mother suggested that the bill might be someone's extremely unfortunate prank. The other relatives also supported this theory. Despite this, the police attempted to trace the bill's path. Alas, it was almost impossible to do so. Paper money changes owners so many times that it was impossible to find the author of this inscription. Experts who studied the bill suggested that the inscription was made by an adult man who was trying to imitate the handwriting of a child. Despite all this, the message on the paper bill seems highly suspicious. Could it have been someone's prank? The chance of police and relatives finding out about the bill are extremely slim. It could have been passed around for years, or it could have settled in a bank vault and no one would have noticed it. The fact that it ended up in the hands of a concerned person who reported it to the police is more of a miracle than inevitability. As for the handwriting, the most obvious version cannot be ruled out. Michaela may have written in a hurry for fear of being caught. Besides, she had been missing for 9 years before the bill appeared. Assuming someone held her captive, did they give her something to write all that time? In 9 years without practice, handwriting can change beyond recognition. There is another question no one knows the answer to. How long ago was this writing made? The bill could have been in circulation for years, or it could have appeared shortly before it was discovered. It's worth remembering about Bullock, who was supposed to be released from prison in 2017. Perhaps this evil prank is his doing, suffice it to recall how he tormented unhappy parents by giving them false hope. Perhaps we will never know the answer to all these questions again, or this case will once again shake the world with unexpected details. Kimber, who was the last person to see her older sister before she was kidnapped, still can't forget that gruesome January night. For a long time, she blamed herself for going home to get her jacket. But now she realizes against an adult kidnapper, she would have been helpless. Kimber raises her young son, to whom she constantly talks about his Aunt Michaela. She calls her an angel who looks out for him. The girl, as well as the rest of her family, are sure that Michaela was kidnapped by Bullock. But without evidence, it can never be proved unless the criminal himself decides to confess in order to deal another blow to the missing girl's family. Do you think there's any hope that the writing on the bill was done by Michaela herself and she is still alive? Write your thoughts in the comments below the video. Also, don't forget to like the video if you like it. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for watching. A 24-year-old girl disappeared from the store where she worked the evening shift. Police found traces of blood in the back room and signs of a struggle, but it was definitely not a robbery. The unknown perpetrator had left a full cash register. A few days later, the girl's body was found 5 kilometers from the store. The investigation of this terrible case dragged on for nearly 25 years. It was not until a quarter of a century later that it became known what had happened to Lisa Seeger. Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. Lisa Marie Seeger was born on March 24, 1968 in Holyoke, Massachusetts. She grew up in a close-knit family with 3 other children besides her, and they lived in a town called Agawam. From an early age, the girl loved music and learned to play several instruments. For a while, she was even a member of the school music group. After high school, Lisa went to Westfield State University, where she received her teaching degree in 1990. As an intern, she worked several shifts as a counselor at a children's camp and also taught Sunday school at her church. After that, she took a job as a teacher's aide at Agawam High School, where she had once studied herself. She spent most of her time working with a group of children with special needs. At the age of 24, she understood her students better than any other teacher. At the same time, she was very professional and tried to ensure that each of her students received the best education possible. She also worked part-time at the local card and gift store in the evenings. On Wednesday, April 15, 1992, she finished her shift at school at about 5:30 and went to the store where she worked until 9 p.m. At about 5:30 p.m., her sister Lynn briefly came in to work with her. According to her recollection, Lisa was in a good mood that evening, and nothing foretold trouble. The next morning, saleswoman Sophia Maynard arrived at the store and was scheduled to begin her shift at 9 o'clock. To her surprise, Lisa's car was in the parking lot. It was strange because the girl worked at school in the mornings and was not supposed to be in the store. In the place of classes, there was a light on inside and a sign on the door that was open. Sophia thought that Lisa might have been out for the morning shift due to the approaching Easter. They were planning to inflate balloons for sale for that holiday. Sophia walked into the store and called Lisa by name, but there was no response. When she approached the counter, she saw Lisa's things there, including her wallet and car keys. It all looked very strange, so Sophia decided to call the police. A squad arrived at the store and began their inspection. Everything looked normal in the main part of the premises, but there was a creepy opening in the back. The officer saw several crushed boxes with traces of blood on them. Later, they found several cards scattered on the floor, which also had blood on them. They also found a small dent in the door, which they thought might have been left by a heel strike. Despite all this, they were unable to find any useful leads on the store premises. It soon became known that Lisa had also failed to show up at school that morning. The principal even called her mother to ask if everything was okay, but her mother did not know where her daughter was either. The news of Lisa's disappearance quickly spread through the small town, and within hours, all of her friends, relatives, and acquaintances were on the case. The first thing the police did was to work up a theory of robbery, but that theory immediately fell away. No one had touched the money in Lisa's cash register or wallet, and all the merchandise was also there. Subsequently, detectives began to reconstruct the chronology of events that evening. They learned that Lisa's sister had left the store at about 6 p.m. After talking to employees at neighboring stores, they obtained more information. At about 7:20 p.m., Lisa spoke with the owner of the carpet store next door. They discussed a pressing problem with the local parking lot, which was being occupied by bowling alley customers. The owner told her that he himself would not risk voicing his displeasure with the drivers who parked in front of their stores because many of them, he said, were crazy and dangerous. He and Lisa talked for about 15 minutes, after which he went home. After examining the cash register, police determined that the last time money had been deposited into it was at 8:20 p.m. Detectives also found a woman who entered the store around 9:05 p.m. The door was open, but the clerk never came out. The woman thought she heard some noise from the back room but decided to leave. Thus, the police established the approximate window of Lisa's disappearance at 8:20 p.m. She served her last customer, and by 9 o'clock, something had happened to her. The detectives were determined to find out what had happened in those 40 minutes. Local investigators were assisted by the FBI and state police. Together, they organized a massive search effort. Foot squads combed the area surrounding the store, helicopters searched the more distant terrain, and police dogs were brought to the store in the hope of picking up Lisa's trail. Unfortunately, none of these efforts yielded any results. Investigators understood that Lisa had clearly not left the store of her own free will. On April 17th, 2 days after her disappearance, the head of the local police announced a reclassification of the case. It was now being investigated as a kidnapping. On Sunday morning, April 19th, all local churches prayed for Lisa to be found alive and unharmed. It was Easter, but there was no holiday spirit at all. At around 2 p.m., the police received a call. A man walking his dog on the outskirts of town near Highway 75 noticed a woman's body while walking along a wooded area. He immediately contacted law enforcement officers, who arrived on the scene and identified Lisa Seeger. They found multiple wounds on her body from a sharp object. Later, medical experts determined that the girl had also been abused. Her body was found approximately 5 kilometers from the store, suggesting that the perpetrator likely drove her there in a car. Detectives immediately cordoned off the area and proceeded with caution to avoid compromising potential evidence. It had been raining in those days, leaving several tire tracks on the soaked dirt road. Unfortunately, the police were unable to find any guns or other tangible evidence. The news that Lisa was the victim of an unknown brutal killer quickly spread throughout the city. A farewell service was held at the church where Lisa taught on Sundays, attended by nearly 1,000 people. Residents of the small town, accustomed to a quiet and safe life, fell into a state close to panic. Many shopkeepers eliminated single shifts, and colleagues walked each other to their cars. Self-defense classes became overcrowded, and about 300 women applied for permits to own firearms. The whole town feared that the unknown criminal might strike again. The police and FBI worked on the case almost around the clock. They managed to obtain a DNA sample from the crime scene that might belong to the killer. They explored the theory that Lisa's boyfriend was involved, but he had an alibi and his DNA did not match the sample. DNA testing was conducted on friends, co-workers, and relatives of the girl, again with no matches. The police received numerous tips from local residents, some reporting sightings of a suspicious car on the night of Lisa's murder. Others claimed to know the name of the culprit. However, all these leads led nowhere, and detectives sifted through them. From the tire tracks on the road near where the body was found, the police determined that they had been left by a van or large SUV. Detectives questioned all drivers of similar vehicles but were no closer to catching the perpetrator. However, they did find a witness who may have seen the same vehicle. An employee of a store near where Lisa worked was driving home at around 9:15 p.m. While standing at a traffic light, she saw a large SUV pulling off the road and heading toward the place where Lisa's body would later be found. The woman could not provide a detailed description of the car due to the darkness, but noted that she believed there was a man and a woman in the car. She also mentioned the odd fact that when the car pulled into the dirt road, the woman's head was twitching unnaturally as if she were asleep or unconscious. Unfortunately, this information also did not lead to a suspect, have since come to an end. The police continued to work on the case, but with each passing month, hope of solving this macabre mystery faded. A year and a half passed before Lisa's family and friends were given a new chance to discover the truth. In October 1993, national television aired an episode devoted to the case. The popular program filmed stories about unsolved cases, which drew enormous attention to them. Sometimes, this led to new witnesses coming forward to the police, and the case got a second wind. Lisa's case was no exception. Within an hour of the broadcast, the police received several hundred calls from people who had some kind of information. As is usually the case, most of these leads led nowhere, but the police worked through each and every one of them. According to the detective, they were able to identify a few valuable leads, but they did not specify which ones. Unfortunately, it also went nowhere. As the years went by, the chances of solving the case steadily declined. Lisa's family went to great lengths to ensure that her legacy was not forgotten. Although her teaching career was cut short early on, Lisa's relatives made a major contribution to the Agawam education system. In 1995, her parents donated $11,000 to the science division of the school where Lisa worked. These funds went to buy equipment and support genetics classes. The parents also set up a fund to help gifted students, which distributed about $35,000 in awards. 10 years had passed since Lisa's murder. Her mother had not given up hope that the case would ever be solved. She went to great lengths to support the memory of her daughter. Her mother took part in every interview, answered reporters' questions, and every year she gathered hundreds of people to honor Lisa's memory and light candles. Meanwhile, the police had only one piece of significant evidence on their hands, a DNA sample from the alleged killer. They kept checking it against known criminal databases, hoping that the right person would turn up sooner or later. But year after year, it didn't. In September 2016, 24 years after Lisa's murder, investigators decided to try a new method, DNA phenotyping. Its essence is the following: based on the information embedded in a person's DNA, experts determine the features of their appearance and build an assumed portrait. Using DNA, specialists can find out the sex, approximate age, eye and hair color. The portrait generated from this data is not always accurate, but sometimes the coincidence with the face of a real person is amazing. Based on the DNA of Lisa's alleged killer, experts presented two portraits of the suspect, one at age 25 and another at age 50. When the police department published these portraits, they received more than 170 calls. These people reported seeing a similar man, but most of these leads also led nowhere. Only a year later, on September 18, 2017, the police suddenly made a high-profile announcement: the perpetrator had been arrested. He turned out to be a 49-year-old man named Gary Shara. The news instantly went viral throughout the American media. Cases where the police find the killer after a quarter of a century are very rare, so such stories immediately attract a huge amount of public attention. Immediately after Shara's arrest, investigators revealed how they had managed to track him down. It turned out that the man had been considered a suspect back in 1993, a year after Lisa's murder. Remember that program on national television after which the police received hundreds of calls with potential leads. One of the callers was a lawyer from Seattle. He told detectives that his client might have information about Lisa's murder. She was a woman who was in the process of divorcing her husband. They lived in a town called Longmeadow, which was near Agawam. According to the woman, her husband was showing increased attention to Lisa Seigert's case. If this murder was on television, he would run into the room and stare blankly at the screen, totally unresponsive to those around him. As you may have realized, this man was Gary Shara. He was 24 years old at the time. He was in a very troubled marriage and had a 1-year-old son. He and his wife were constantly fighting and had already begun divorce proceedings shortly after the birth of their child. According to the police statement, they had worked out the theory that Gary was involved back in 1993 but found no evidence to support it. On the contrary, his ex-wife, as a source of information, raised doubts. The fact is that she had a whole list of mental disorders as well as a long history of alcohol abuse. Moreover, during the divorce, Gary obtained custody of their son through the courts, but his wife secretly removed the child to another state. Another important fact to add here is that this was by no means the first time that former or current wives had called the police, saying that their husbands might be involved in Lisa's murder. Surprisingly, there were indeed many such calls. So, the detectives thought that Gary's case was just one of those. Even so, they questioned him, but the man denied his involvement and refused to give a DNA sample. No one could legally force him to give a sample, so the police essentially had no other options. Later, detectives compiled a list of all the men questioned in the case who refused to give a DNA sample. Gary was among them, and the police called him in for questioning several more times. During the third interview in 2008, it was apparent that Gary was trying not to touch anything, not even the table. He was offered a bottle of water, but he refused. He looked as if he had only one thing on his mind: how the cops wouldn't get his DNA sample. By 2017, detectives had a list of 11 suspects on their hands, including Gary. All of them had been interviewed at various stages of the investigation and refused to voluntarily submit to DNA testing. In fact, there were many more suspects on that list, but through DNA phenotyping, investigators were able to weed out unsuitable candidates. They did not match some of the characteristics that experts determined from the DNA sample of Lisa's killer. In August 2017, detectives gathered all available information and went to court. They asked for an order compelling all the list members to provide DNA samples, and the court agreed. On September 13th of that same year, police went to Gary's apartment to notify him of this obligation, but the man was not home. The door was opened by his neighbor, with whom they shared an apartment. The detectives left him their business card and asked him to give the information to Gary urgently. The very next day, something unexpected happened. Gary's current girlfriend came to the police station and reported that he had left 3 letters in her apartment. To the researchers' surprise, among them was an apology to the Seegert family and a detailed confession of Lisa's murder on 2 sheets. Gary wrote that he had had violent and uncontrollable desires in him since childhood. He was obsessed with thoughts of kidnapping and abuse. That evening, as he drove past Lisa, Gary, as he himself articulated in a letter, allowed himself to do something horrible. The man specified that he did not plan to kill Lisa, but events allegedly got out of his control. Gary wrote that he wanted to surrender to the police hundreds of times but could not do so because of cowardice. He stated that he had lived with self-loathing all these years. At the end of the letter, he stated that he planned to end his life. Police immediately began searching for Gary, and soon his car was spotted in the parking lot of a hospital in Stafford Springs. There was another suicide note on the windshield. It turned out the man had ingested some powerful drugs but got in his car immediately afterwards and rushed to the nearest hospital, where he was pumped out. As soon as the doctors were finished helping him, the police arrested Gary and took him to the station. At the same time, a judge issued a search warrant for his apartment as well as his girlfriend's apartment. There, the police seized several objects containing his DNA. The result of the analysis surprised no one, a complete match with the sample of the killer. Along with that, detectives uncovered several other potentially significant leads. Gary's wife, who had reported suspicions about him back in 1993, passed away in 2014. However, investigators were able to find documents drafted by her lawyer where the woman revealed many gruesome details. One day, Gary told her in plain language that he could not engage in intimacy with her unless he had a knife in his hand. The day after Lisa's murder, the woman called her sister and told her that Gary had come home late at night, was extremely disturbed, and his body was covered with scratches. He also gave his wife a music box and said that he had bought it at the very store where Lisa worked, except, according to Gary himself, it was an older woman with gray hair who sold it to him. The problem is that no such employee has ever been there. It is not clear why all these details were not reported to the police in 1993, and it is impossible to find out now. While in custody, Gary suddenly proclaimed his innocence and refused to confess to what he had done. In all likelihood, he was driven by simple fear, but with that kind of evidence, there was no chance of getting away with it. The only thing he was able to achieve was a postponement of his sentence. The trial was not to begin until 2 years later, but Gary, who had been in a cell the whole time, suddenly decided to confess. On September 21, 2019, he appeared before a judge and pleaded guilty to the murder of Lisa Seegert. This charge qualified as first-degree murder, and in Massachusetts, a defendant on such a sentence faces life in prison without parole. Lisa's family was present in the courtroom. Her mother, who had hoped for 25 years to learn the truth, spoke. She thanked everyone involved in the investigation, as well as the ordinary concerned people who had supported her family all this time. As a result, the killer went to live out the rest of his life behind bars. One of the state's longest-running criminal cases was officially closed. Despite the fact that it took a quarter of a century, the bitter truth in such a case is anything better than endless ignorance. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and remember to subscribe. Click on one of the 2 videos on your screen for more content like this.